Have you ever heard that every great mind carries a touch of madness? Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of antiquity, truly believed that. But what did he actually mean by that? And more importantly, why does it still matter today? In this video, you'll discover how Aristotle tried to explain everything, from the essence of reality to the path toward happiness. Get ready to dive into the mind of the man who saw the invisible. This is the entire philosophy of Aristotle, like you've never seen it before. At the heart of Aristotle's thought lies an unshakable belief. Human reason is capable of reaching the truth, but for that to happen, it needs the right tool. And that tool is logic. Aristotle was the first philosopher to systematize logic as a rigorous method of investigating thought, something that could be learned, taught, and applied. He didn't see it as just another branch of knowledge, but as the fundamental instrument for all knowledge. That's why his collection of writings on the subject was called organon, a Greek word meaning instrument. But why call logic an instrument? Imagine a talented sculptor who, despite his skill, doesn't have the tools to shape the stone. In the same way, a human being, no matter how intelligent, is limited without the proper means to organize and test their reasoning. Logic is what structures thought. It shows the path to distinguish the true from the false, the valid from the invalid, the essential from the trivial. The Organon isn't a single book, but a collection of 6 treatises that form the foundation of logical thinking in the West. They are categories: on interpretation, prior analytics, posterior analytics topics, sophistical refutations. Each of these works explores a part of the rational process. It's not just about thinking, everyone thinks, but about thinking well. Aristotle wanted thought to follow a coherent structure that could be analyzed, verified, and clearly communicated. What he proposed was a map of human reasoning, a system to guide the intellect through safe paths. One of the most powerful elements of this proposal appears in the prior analytics, where he develops the famous theory of the syllogism, a form of deductive reasoning where from 2 premises we reach a necessary conclusion. For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. This kind of structure reveals the power of formal logic. If the premises are true and the form is valid, the conclusion is unavoidable. With this, Aristotle not only defined the basis of deduction, but also created the first formal logic in history, one that would deeply influence Western thought for over 2,000 years. In the posterior analytics, he goes further and asks, how is scientific knowledge possible? His answer is that true knowledge must be based on causes and demonstrated through self-evident principles. Here, he connects logic with the search for deeper understanding, turning it into not just a technique, but the foundation of both science and philosophy. In categories, Aristotle organizes everything that can be said about anything that exists. He proposes 10 fundamental categories, such as substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, and time, which serve to describe reality in an orderly way. These categories aren't just grammatical terms, they're the ways in which being manifests and can be thought about. In On Interpretation, he analyzes how words form propositions and how those propositions can be true or false. Here appears one of the most important ideas in his logic, the correspondence between language, thought, and reality. What we say only has logical value if it's in harmony with what is. Finally, in Topics and Sophistical Refutations, Aristotle turns to the practical use of logic in debate. He teaches how to build effective arguments, detect fallacies, and avoid errors in reasoning. This part of logic is vital not only for philosophy, but also for everyday dialogue, rhetoric, and even public debate. What Aristotle gives us with the organon is a universal method of investigation, one that can be applied to physics, ethics, biology, or politics. He was convinced that clarity in thought is the first step toward clarity in life, and that without logic, we're at the mercy of passions, illusions, and the traps of language. In Aristotle's own words, It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. This sentence perfectly captures the logical spirit, the ability to examine ideas with distance, honesty, and precision, without falling into blind belief or prejudice. Logic, therefore, isn't cold or detached from life. On the contrary, it's the thread that ties thought to reality. It allows our ideas to be more than loose opinions. They become reasoned arguments based on clear principles. In the end, what Aristotle teaches us is simple yet profound. To think well is to live better. When Aristotle began his study of logic, he wasn't just interested in listing rules of reasoning. His goal was much deeper: to understand how human thought can reach true conclusions in a necessary and coherent way. That's how he developed what would become the backbone of all formal logic: the syllogism. A syllogism is, essentially, a form of deductive reasoning. To deduce means to draw a conclusion from premises already accepted as true. Aristotle realized that if we start with two correct statements, a third conclusion can be logically and inevitably drawn. A classic example helps illustrate this. All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. Here we have the basic structure of a syllogism: two premises and one conclusion. What's impressive about this construction is its simplicity and power. The truth of the conclusion doesn't depend on opinion, but on the internal validity of the logical form. If the structure is correct and the premises are true, then the conclusion is necessarily true. Aristotle didn't just invent the syllogism, he classified and analyzed its different types. He distinguished, for example, between categorical syllogisms, where something is affirmed about a category, like in the example of Socrates, and more complex forms involving conditions, negations, or hypotheses. In his own words, a syllogism is a statement in which certain things being established, something else necessarily follows from them. Prior analytics, I.1. This idea of logical necessity is central. The conclusion isn't just an opinion or a possibility. It follows from the premises as an inevitable consequence. In this way, Aristotle was founding a science of reasoning, something that could be studied rigorously, a kind of mathematics of thought. And why is this so important? Because human beings live surrounded by statements, ideas, and arguments, and not all of them are true. In politics, religion, science, or everyday life, we constantly face weak, manipulative, or emotional reasoning. Aristotelian logic offers an intellectual defense tool. It teaches us to test the validity of arguments and to separate what's well-grounded from what's just empty rhetoric. While studying syllogisms, Aristotle also realized that the form of an argument is as important as its content. Even if we're talking about different subjects, if the logical structure is the same, the reasoning will still be valid. This led him to create figures and modes of syllogisms, categories that organize possible types of reasoning based on the position of terms and the quality of propositions, affirmative or negative, universal or particular. He identified three main terms that make up a syllogism: major term, usually the predicate of the conclusion; minor term, the subject of the conclusion; middle term, the one that appears in both premises and connects the other two. In the example above, mortal is the major term, Socrates is the minor term, human is the middle term. The middle term works like a bridge between the other two, allowing the conclusion to stand logically. Without it, the reasoning doesn't close. This shows the level of sophistication and precision with which Aristotle treated human thought, not as something chaotic, but as something that can be structured and disciplined. However, Aristotle didn't stop at pure form. He knew that not all knowledge comes from immediate deduction. That's why, in the posterior analytics, he distinguished between two types of reasoning. Deduction, syllogismos, starts from universal principles and reaches particular conclusions. Induction, epagoge, starts from particular observations and reaches general principles. Deduction, therefore, is essential for scientific knowledge because it guarantees the logical necessity of conclusions. but it depends on principles that must be known by other means, such as induction or intellectual intuition. This balance between formal logic and observation of the real world was key for Aristotle to build his thinking in areas like biology, physics, ethics, and politics. After all, deduction only has value when applied to true content. It's not enough to reason correctly, we must reason about reality. It's worth remembering that this model of reasoning deeply influenced the history of philosophy and science. During the Middle Ages, the scholastics used syllogisms as the basis for theological debates. In the Renaissance, logic continued to be taught as an essential part of intellectual education. And even today, Aristotle's foundations are studied in philosophy, law, and formal logic courses. But more than an ancient technique, the syllogism remains a model of clarity and intellectual honesty. In times of misinformation, shallow discourse, and emotional manipulation, understanding how a solid argument works is an act of resistance. Learning to deduce correctly is also learning to think independently. As Aristotle teaches us, true thought isn't the one that imposes itself by force, but the one that convinces by the necessity of reason. And the syllogism is the first step on that path. Have you ever stopped to think about how we structure the world through words? Before we can build theories or create arguments, we need to know what we're talking about. Aristotle understood this with remarkable clarity. He realized that behind every statement lies an invisible structure that connects thought, language, and reality. To explore that structure, he wrote Categories, one of the most important works in the entire history of philosophy. But what exactly are categories? For Aristotle, they are the fundamental ways of being and of speaking about being. They are the different aspects under which things can be understood, named, and classified. In other words, they are the first divisions of reality, the basic ways in which we can say something about anything that exists. Whenever we speak about something, we're not just throwing words into the air. Every statement involves some kind of relationship with reality. And that's exactly what Aristotle wanted to understand. What are the most basic ways in which we talk about things? What are the most universal concepts that apply to everything that exists? His answer was precise and revolutionary. He identified 10 main categories, which can be seen as the 10 fundamental ways of predicating something about a subject. They are substance, ousia, quantity, quality relation, place-time position or situation, state or condition, action passion, in the sense of being acted upon or undergoing something. Let's briefly understand each one. Substance is the most important category. It refers to what exists in itself and not in something else. When we say Socrates, we are referring to a substance, a concrete individual that exists on its own. Everything else we say about him, being tall, sitting, wise, are attributes of that substance, things that exist in something else. Quantity refers to how much something is, 1 meter, 3 kilograms, 2 hands. Quality refers to how something is, brave, white, round. Relation expresses how something connects to something else, greater than, brother of, owner of. Place indicates where, in Athens, in the market. Time, when, yesterday, now, in 5 minutes. Position, how, sitting, lying down, standing. State, in what condition. Armed, wearing shoes, dressed. Action, what it does, cuts, teaches, runs. Passion, what it undergoes, is cut, is taught, is struck. These categories are not just random labels. They represent the fundamental ways of being in the world. Anything that exists can be described using these forms. They're like the axes that support our thinking and language. And more than that, they are what make logic possible. For example, when we say Socrates is wise, we're connecting a substance, Socrates, with a quality, wise. If we say the stone weighs 2 kilos, we're connecting a substance, stone, with a quantity. Aristotelian logic works because these categories structure our way of speaking and thinking. They're not inventions of language. They express the structure of being itself. This is where Aristotle moves far away from Plato. For Plato, universal concepts, like justice, beauty, or virtue, exist in a separate ideal world, beyond the physical one. Aristotle, on the other hand, brings philosophy back down to earth. For him, universals exist in things. They're not separate, but manifested within individual substances. The categories, then, are not just linguistic. They're ontological, meaning they describe the structure of reality itself. They organize not only our grammar, but also our understanding of the world. And that has huge implications. First, it means that language has a deep connection with reality. It's not just a game of words. When we speak correctly about something, we're saying something true about the world. This is the foundation of Aristotle's theory of truth. To say that what is, and what is not. That's the core of the correspondence between speech and reality. Second, the categories help us avoid conceptual confusion. Many logical errors and fallacies arise when we mix categories. For instance, when we treat qualities as if they were substances, or confuse relations with states. A philosopher trained in logic and categories can separate these distinctions clearly, and therefore think with precision. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect is that the categories also mirror human experience. Everything we live, our bodies, actions, emotions, relationships, and thoughts, can be described through them. It's as if Aristotle had uncovered the deep grammar of reality itself. And this leads to a personal reflection. How are we using words to describe the world? Can we distinguish what's essential from what's accidental? Do we know when we're describing temporary states? And when we're speaking about something that truly defines what a thing is? Aristotle invites us to be more aware of what we say and how we think. With the categories, he gives us a kind of map of being, not to limit us, but to guide us. Before we can say that something is true or false, we first need to ask, what exactly are we saying? For Aristotle, the starting point of knowledge doesn't lie in vague ideas or scattered sensations, but in clear statements that can be examined by reason. It's in this effort that his theory of proposition and truth emerges, an essential step for logic, philosophy, and even science. But what is a proposition, exactly? According to Aristotle, a proposition is a combination of terms that affirms or denies something about something. For example, when we say man is mortal, we're joining a subject, man, with a predicate, mortal, through a verb, is. This kind of structure allows language to express something that can be evaluated as either true or false. In other words, something that has logical value. Not every sentence is a proposition. For Aristotle, phrases like, "Oh, what a beautiful day," or "I wish I could travel," are emotional expressions or wishes, but they don't have logical value because they neither affirm nor deny anything that can be rationally tested. Logic begins with propositions, and a proposition arises from our ability to say what is or what is not. This distinction appears clearly in his work, On Interpretation, Peri Hermeneus, where he studies how sounds, words, and phrases connect thought to the world. There, Aristotle writes, "To say of what is that it is, and of what is not that it is not, is true. To say of what is that it is not, or of what is not that it is false." Although simple, this statement is one of the most influential in the history of philosophy. It defines what we now call the correspondence theory of truth, the idea that a proposition is true when it matches reality, when it says what truly is. It's false when it claims the opposite of what exists. Saying snow is white is true if, and only if, snow really is white. This might sound obvious, but Aristotle was the first to give this concept a systematic foundation. With that, he establishes that truth exists in propositions, not in things themselves or merely in ideas. Things simply are what they are. They're not true or false on their own. But propositions, by speaking about things, can be right or wrong. That's the heart of rational thought. Language as the bridge between the world and the intellect. Another key part of Aristotle's theory is his analysis of propositions by quantity and quality. He classifies them into four basic types according to two criteria. Quantity, universal, referring to all members of a group, or particular, referring to some. Quality, affirmative, saying that something is, or negative, saying that something is not. From these combinations come the four classical types of propositions. A. Universal affirmative, all men are mortal. E. Universal negative, no man is immortal. I. Particular affirmative, some men are wise. O. Particular negative, some men are not wise. These structures form the foundation of traditional logic and syllogistic reasoning, as discussed earlier. Aristotle shows that the validity of an argument depends on how these propositions are combined, and that demands precision. A small mistake in structure, such as confusing a universal with a particular, can lead to false conclusions. Moreover, Aristotle emphasizes that a proposition's truth value depends not only on proper language, but on its connection to reality. This means logic, though formal, is never an empty game. It must always refer back to being. As he says in his Metaphysics, it is the task of the philosopher to investigate the cause of being as being. The theory of proposition, then, is not just a debating tool. It's a philosophy of language that supports the very possibility of knowledge. Without clear propositions, there's no way to state anything about the world. Without a theory of truth, there's no way to know if what we say actually corresponds to reality. And beyond that, this theory has a deep ethical meaning. Speaking the truth is more than being sincere. It's about expressing, with clarity and precision, what really is. In times of manipulation, noise, and distortion of language, Aristotle calls us to intellectual honesty. He reminds us that to think well is to speak well, and to speak well is to respect reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. That's why the theory of proposition is not just a technical part of logic. It's an invitation to responsibility in thinking. Every time we say something, we make a commitment to the world, to reason, and to others. We place ourselves before reality and ask, what can I truly say, and say truthfully? Not every argument that sounds true actually is true. Not every well-phrased conclusion has a solid logical foundation. Often, the problem isn't just in what is being said, it's in how it's being reasoned. Aristotle saw this with remarkable clarity and devoted an entire work to a topic that remains just as relevant today. Sophisms, false arguments that seem correct but aren't. That work is called Sophistical Refutations, or On Sophistical Refutations, and it concludes the logical collection known as the Organon. Unlike the Analytics, where Aristotle studies valid reasoning, here he turns to the opposite, the errors of thought. But these aren't simple or careless mistakes. They're subtle fallacies, sometimes deliberate, that can confuse even the most experienced thinkers. They were widely used by the sophists of ancient Greece. The sophists were masters of rhetoric, who often cared more about persuasion than truth. For Aristotle, this was dangerous. He believed philosophy should seek what is true, not merely what is convincing. That's why studying fallacies was, for him, also an ethical exercise. Learning how to think correctly and defend oneself against the tricks of deceptive reasoning. So what exactly is a fallacy? A fallacy is a piece of reasoning that looks valid, but isn't. Its danger lies in that illusion. It disguises itself as logic, but hides structural breaks, ambiguity, exaggeration, or manipulation. Aristotle classified fallacies into two main groups: linguistic fallacies based on language, and non-linguistic fallacies based on reasoning itself, each with specific subtypes. Let's look at some of the most important ones, all of which, surprisingly, are still common in daily life today. 1. Ambiguity, equivocation. One of the classic linguistic fallacies is ambiguity. when the same word is used with different meanings within the same argument. Example: what is light doesn't weigh much. Light is bright, therefore light doesn't weigh much. Here, the word light has two meanings, one referring to weight and another to illumination. The conclusion sounds logical, but the shift in meaning makes the argument invalid. 2. Composition and division. These fallacies happen when we confuse what's true for the whole with what's true for the parts, or the other way around. Examples: each part of the car is light, therefore the car is light. The team is excellent, therefore every player is excellent. Such reasoning mistakes show how easy it is to mix up different levels of generalization. Aristotle warned that an argument's validity depends on consistency between part and whole. 3. Begging the question, petitio principii. This is one of the most subtle fallacies, circular reasoning. The conclusion is already hidden in the premise without actually being proven. Example: the soul is immortal because it doesn't die. Here, the statement merely repeats what it's supposed to prove without any independent justification. It sounds logical, but there's no real connection between premise and conclusion, just a rhetorical loop. 4. False cause. This fallacy assumes that because one thing happens before another, it must have caused it. The classic post hoc ergo propter hoc. Example: ever since he started wearing that ring, his luck has improved. Therefore, the ring brings good luck. This plays on our natural tendency to look for patterns and causal connections, even where none exist. Aristotle saw this as one of humanity's biggest reasoning flaws, our rush to conclude. 5. Attacking the person, ad hominem. Though Aristotle didn't use the modern term ad hominem, he recognized the practice of discrediting an idea by attacking the person presenting it. This fallacy remains extremely common in political and public debates. Example: we can't take this theory seriously because it was proposed by an inexperienced young man. The truth or falsity of an idea doesn't depend on who says it, but on its logical and factual coherence. Ignoring that destroys the philosophical value of discussion. 6. Hasty generalization. Another frequent mistake is drawing universal conclusions from isolated cases. Example: I met 2 rude taxi drivers, therefore all taxi drivers are rude. This fallacy arises from haste and prejudice. Aristotle reminds us that genuine thought requires time, method, and caution. To generalize without enough evidence is to abandon reason in favor of emotion. The study of sophisms, therefore, is not just a technical exercise. It's a lesson in intellectual awareness. Aristotle believed that a good philosopher isn't just someone who argues well, but someone who can recognize reasoning errors, both in others and in themselves, and knows how to refute them with clarity and elegance. In a world where information spreads at lightning speed and speech is often used to manipulate, distort, or persuade without reason, learning to identify fallacies is more vital than ever. It's an act of intellectual freedom. As Aristotle said, man is by nature a rational being, but he must learn to use that reason well. And that begins with the awareness that not every argument is trustworthy, and that thinking well requires more than intelligence. It requires discipline, honesty, and a love of truth. 6. First philosophy, the study of being as being. Every science has its object. Medicine studies the human body, biology investigates living beings, and mathematics deals with numbers and shapes. But there's a deeper question that comes before all the others. What does it mean to be? This question doesn't seek to know a part of the world, but the totality of everything that exists. It's here that Aristotle introduces what he called first philosophy, the study of being as being. This field of knowledge would later be known as metaphysics, though Aristotle himself never used that term. The name came from the editors of his works, who placed his writings on this subject meta ta physica, meaning after the physics. But what truly matters is the content, an investigation into the most universal principles of reality. While other sciences study being under specific aspects, as living, as moving, as measurable. First philosophy studies being in its totality, in its deepest and most absolute sense. That's why Aristotle defines it as follows. There is a science that studies being as being and the attributes that belong to it by its very nature. Metaphysics IV 1. This science doesn't just investigate what things are, but what it means to be. For Aristotle, being isn't a single uniform concept. There's no single definition that applies equally to everything. On the contrary, he says that being is said in many ways, and the task of first philosophy is to understand those ways and find a unifying principle behind them. At this point, Aristotle introduces a fundamental distinction between two meanings of being. Being as substance, ousia, what exists in itself, what sustains everything else. Being as accident or attribute, the qualities, quantities, actions, and relations that exist in a substance. For example, Socrates is a substance. Being tall, sitting down, or being a philosopher are attributes that exist in him but not on their own. So, to understand being in its most fundamental sense, Aristotle focuses on substance, because it is what supports the existence of all other modes of being. First philosophy, then, becomes the study of the causes and first principles of being as such. This means seeking what lies at the foundation of everything that exists, not behind appearances, but within the very structure of reality. Here, two key ideas come into play: causality and essence. The notion of cause, which Aristotle would later divide into the four causes, explored in the next lesson, serves as a path to understanding being. Nothing exists by chance. Everything has an explanation, an origin, and a purpose. The philosopher must therefore search for the deepest why of things, the one that doesn't depend on any further explanation. Essence, on the other hand, is what makes a thing what it is. To know what being is, we must discover the fundamental structure of things, what remains even when appearances change. When we understand the essence of something, we grasp its most intimate nature. That's why Aristotle says that first philosophy is also the science of primary substance, not the kind that is physical and perishable, like individual beings, but an eternal, unchanging, and necessary substance. This search leads to the idea of a supreme principle of being, that which sustains all reality and depends on nothing else. Later in the Metaphysics, Aristotle identifies this principle as the unmoved mover, the being that moves everything without being moved, pure actuality, the source of all reality, eternal and immaterial. But before reaching that theological conclusion, he carefully builds the logical structure of being. The modes of existence, the categories, the distinction between act and potentiality, and the relationship between matter and form. What makes first philosophy so special is that it isn't subordinate to any other science. It is their foundation. Every science assumes that being exists, but none of them asks what it means to exist. Only philosophy faces that question head-on. Moreover, this investigation carries a deep existential meaning. To study being as being isn't just to reflect on abstract ideas. It's to look at the foundation of everything, the world, things, and ourselves. Aristotle never separated philosophy from life. To understand what being is also to understand who we are, and that demands depth, time, and courage. As he famously wrote, "All men by nature desire to know." Metaphysics I 1. That desire is the driving force of philosophy, and first philosophy is the highest expression of that pursuit. It's not a science of formulas or data, but a wisdom born from contemplation, one that looks beyond what's immediate, in search of what endures, what is. Studying first philosophy is like looking up at the night sky and asking, why is there something rather than nothing? That is where true philosophy begins, not with ready-made answers, but with the courage to ask about being itself in all its depth and mystery. To truly understand the world, it's not enough to notice appearances. We must discover what things really are, in their essence. Aristotle knew this, and that's why he devoted a central part of his philosophy to studying what he called substance, in Greek, ousia. For him, this concept is the key to understanding reality itself. But what exactly is substance? Aristotle defines substance as that which exists in itself and not in another. It is the support, the foundation, the most authentic kind of being. While accidents, like color, size, position, or state, depend on something else to exist, substance exists independently. For example, Socrates is a substance. His height, age, or mood are attributes that exist in him, but not by themselves. This distinction may sound subtle, but it's revolutionary. Aristotle is saying that not everything we perceive with our senses is equally real. There's a deeper level of being that sustains all others, and that level is substance. Substance has two main aspects: essence and existence. Essence is what makes a thing what it is, what defines its nature. Existence is simply the fact that the thing is, that it exists in the world. For Aristotle, these two dimensions come together in the concrete substance. This view marks a major break from Plato. For Plato, what truly exists are universal ideas, perfect, unchanging, and separate from the physical world. What we see with our eyes are just imperfect copies of those ideal forms. Aristotle rejects this separation. He argues that the essence of things isn't in another world, but within the things themselves, in the form that gives structure to matter. So, when we look at a horse, an oak tree, or a human being, we're looking at substances made of form and matter. The form determines what the thing is. The matter gives it body and individuality. This unity of form and matter is what Aristotle calls an individual substance. Because of that, he doesn't see the physical world as an illusion, but as the very reality where being reveals itself. And by examining this reality, philosophy can uncover the fundamental structures of existence. But substance isn't just an abstract idea. It's also the starting point of all knowledge. Every science begins with something that exists. And what exists in itself, independently, is substance. That's why, in his Metaphysics, Aristotle states, "The highest science is the one that studies being as being and what belongs to being by its own nature. And this is the study of substance." Another important point: substance is also at the center of change and movement. Things change, but something remains through that change, and that something is substance. For example, a child grows, learns, and ages, but remains the same person. The accidents change, but the substance persists. That's what allows identity to endure through time. This idea connects to Aristotle's theory of act and potentiality. Every substance has potentialities, capacities to be or to become something, and it fulfills those potentialities through act. Essence, then, is present as a real possibility that unfolds over time. For example, a seed has the potential to become a tree. The form of the tree already exists in the seed, not as an image, but as a principle of development. When that potential is fulfilled, the tree exists in act. Substance, therefore, is the place where being fully manifests itself, uniting matter, form, essence, and existence. This way of understanding reality allowed Aristotle to build a philosophy deeply connected to the world. He wasn't trying to escape from sensory experience. He wanted to understand its foundation, and that foundation is substance. Moreover, Aristotle's theory of substance has far-reaching consequences in ethics, politics, and even theology. In ethics, for example, the essence of human beings, their rational nature, is what grounds the idea of virtue and the ultimate goal of life. In politics, the substance of the polis, the city-state, as a natural community, shapes his concept of justice and the common good. And in metaphysics, the notion of a pure, immaterial substance leads to the idea of the unmoved mover, the ultimate cause of all being. By placing substance at the center of his philosophy, Aristotle teaches that understanding what something is, in its essence, is the first step to understanding the world. From there, we can talk about truth, change, knowledge, and purpose. Ousia, therefore, isn't just what exists. It's what makes all meaningful existence possible. And that's likely why Aristotle dedicated so much effort to studying it. Because to understand substance is, ultimately, to understand being itself. Why do things exist the way they do? What explains the reality around us? Objects, living beings, and events. For Aristotle, none of these questions can be answered by a single factor. Reality is far too complex to be explained by just one cause. That's why he developed a theory that would change the history of thought, the doctrine of the four causes. Aristotle realized that to truly understand something, it's not enough to say it exists or it happened. We need to understand why it exists, how it came to be, what it is, and what purpose it serves. In other words, a complete explanation must include four dimensions: the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause. Let's look at each of them clearly and simply. 1. Material cause. What is it made of? The material cause is the physical substance from which something is made. It's what allows a thing to exist in a tangible way. For example, the material cause of a statue is marble. The material cause of a house is bricks and cement. The material cause of a human body is the physical elements that compose it. But Aristotle goes beyond the physical description. Matter by itself doesn't explain what something truly is. It's just the starting point. Marble alone is not a statue. It's raw material without shape or meaning. Matter is pure potential, a possibility waiting to be realized. 2. Formal cause. What is it? Next comes the formal cause, which corresponds to the structure, form, or essence of a thing. It's what gives matter its specific identity. In the case of the statue, the form is the sculpted image, what makes the marble a statue and not just a block of stone. In Aristotle's philosophy, form is the principle that gives identity to a substance. It answers the question, what is this? The form of a tree is what makes it a tree and not a rock or an animal. The form of a human being is rationality, the ability to think, choose, and know. It's important to remember that form isn't just the outward appearance. It's the inner principle that organizes matter and defines the essence of being. Together, matter and form make up what Aristotle calls an individual substance. 3. Efficient cause. Who or what made it? The efficient cause is what brings about change or movement. In simple terms, the agent that produces something. In the case of the statue, the sculptor is the efficient cause, the one who shapes the marble. In a house, it's the builder. In the birth of a person, it's the parents. This cause answers questions like, who made this? Or, what caused this to happen? Aristotle recognized that without an efficient cause, change can't occur, but he also noted that it never acts alone. A sculptor, no matter how skilled, can't create anything without marble and the idea of the form. Everything is interconnected. He also expanded the idea of the efficient cause to include natural phenomena, not just human actions. For instance, the sun can be the efficient cause of a fruit ripening, and the wind can be the efficient cause of erosion. In short, the efficient cause is any active principle that initiates a process of change. 4. Final cause. Why does it exist? The deepest of all is the final cause. The reason why something exists, its purpose, or its end goal. For the statue, the final cause might be to represent a deity, honor someone, or simply beautify a space. The final cause answers the question, what is this for? Or, for what purpose was it made? For Aristotle, everything in nature has an end or purpose. This is what he calls teleology, the idea that everything naturally moves toward fulfilling its purpose. The seed exists to become a tree. The eye exists to see. The human being exists to achieve eudaimonia, the full realization of their rational nature. Even in nature, Aristotle saw direction and purpose. A stone falls because it seeks the center of the earth. Fire rises because it tends toward its natural place. Nothing happens by accident. Everything has a final cause, even if that purpose isn't conscious or intentional. A complete example. Let's return to the example of the statue to see how all four causes work together. Material cause, the marble. Formal cause, the shape of a human body. Efficient cause, the sculptor who shapes the stone. Final cause, the goal of representing a figure, honoring someone, or decorating a space. With this model, Aristotle shows that to truly understand something, we need multiple explanations. It's not enough to know the material, the maker, or the function. We must understand all of these together as parts of a unified explanation. Why does this matter? The doctrine of the four causes isn't just a theoretical exercise. It changes how we see the world. Instead of searching for single linear explanations, Aristotle invites us to think in a broader, more integrated way. This approach opens the door to scientific reasoning, ethical reflection, artistic creation, political understanding, and even daily life. Above all, it teaches us that to understand something is to look for its deepest reasons, the factors that sustain it, shape it, create it, and guide it. Thinking this way is more than knowledge. It's philosophy with awareness of the complexity of being. If you look at a tiny seed and then at a tall, leafy tree, it's clear that something remarkable has happened, a transformation. Something small and seemingly lifeless became something alive, strong, and full of form. But what explains that change? How can something stop being what it is now and become something it isn't yet? For Aristotle, this question lies at the heart of reality itself. His answer comes through one of his deepest ideas, the theory of potentiality and actuality. This theory isn't just about physical growth or movement. It's a key to understanding the structure of being, how things exist, change, and fulfill their essence. Aristotle developed this idea to solve problems left by earlier philosophers, especially Parmenides, who claimed that change was impossible because being cannot come from non-being. Aristotle offered a different path. Instead of treating being as something fixed or seeing change as an illusion, he showed that being can exist in two different modes, as potentiality, dynamis, and as actuality, energeia. Potentiality, what something can become. Potentiality is the capacity to be something that a thing is not yet, but could become. It's the real possibility contained within something. A seed has the potential to become a tree. A child has the potential to become an adult. A block of wood has the potential to become a chair if someone acts upon it. Potentiality, therefore, isn't a fantasy or an abstract idea. It's a real but incomplete state of being. This is where Aristotle differs from Plato. He isn't talking about a separate world of ideas, but about real possibilities that exist in this world. Actuality. What something has become. Actuality is the full realization of potentiality. When the seed sprouts, grows, and becomes a tree, it fulfills the potential that was already inside it. When wood is shaped into a chair, its potential becomes actuality, a concrete, complete form. Actuality is being at its fullness, the final stage of change when something has become what it truly is in reality, not just in possibility. For Aristotle, nothing changes without a transition from potentiality to actuality. This transition doesn't happen by accident. There's always an agent, a condition, or a force that brings what can be into what is. It's this dynamic tension between potential and act that explains movement, transformation, natural growth, and even human actions. Change as actualization. Aristotle defined change as the actuality of what exists in potentiality, insofar as it is potential. That sounds technical, but it simply means this. Every change involves something that has the capacity to become different, but hasn't yet. Wood becomes a chair because it can be a chair. Marble becomes a statue because it can receive form. Without potentiality, there's nothing to realize. Without actuality, potential remains empty. Both are necessary for being to develop. This has deep implications, even in ethics. Human beings are rational and virtuous in potential. But to live well, we must actualize those potentials, to become virtuous in act. No one is born complete. The ethical life is a continuous process of becoming what we are capable of being. Matter and form, the link to substance. This theory also connects directly to Aristotle's idea of substance. Remember, every substance is made of matter, what something is made of, and form, what something is. Matter represents potentiality, and form represents actuality. For example, bronze is the matter, potential, of a sculpture. The shape or image expressed in it is the form, actuality. Together, matter and form create the full substance, which means potentiality and actuality aren't separate realities, but complementary ways of being. The unmoved mover, pure act. This theory reaches its highest point when Aristotle applies it to the first cause of the universe. If everything that moves goes from potential to actual, then there must be a first being that is only actuality. With no potentiality, no change, no lack. This being is what Aristotle calls the unmoved mover, the supreme reality that moves everything without itself being moved. Pure act, absolute perfection. The unmoved mover is the foundation of all reality. It doesn't move things by pushing them, but as a final cause, by attracting all things toward their natural end, just as goodness draws desire. That's why Aristotle later describes this pure act as a kind of divine being, eternal, unchanging, and self-thinking, potentiality and actuality in everyday life. The beauty of this theory is that it's not only metaphysical, it applies to everyday life. Each of us carries potentials that haven't yet been realized, skills, talents, virtues, knowledge. To live, according to Aristotle, is to turn potential into reality, to become what we are capable of being. As he writes in the Metaphysics, actuality is prior to potentiality, both in being and in knowledge. That line is a reminder, a call to action. Fulfillment comes from movement, development, and realization. It's not enough to have potential. It must be brought into being. The theory of potentiality and actuality teaches that being is not something fixed, but a process, a journey toward full realization. And that realization is what gives meaning to existence, whether in a tree growing from a seed, a sculpture taking shape from marble, or a human being striving to become their best self. In his search to understand the totality of being, Aristotle reached an inevitable question. What lies at the origin of everything? What is responsible for moving the universe without itself being moved by anything else? This question isn't just physical, it's deeply metaphysical. And his answer led to one of the most powerful ideas in his philosophy, the concept of the unmoved mover, the ultimate foundation of reality. The theory of the unmoved mover marks the climax of Aristotle's metaphysics, especially in Book 2, Lambda, where he brings together physics, ontology, and theology in a reflection on the absolute principle of the cosmos. But to understand this concept, we need to take a step back and recall something essential. Everything that changes, changes because of a cause. Every transformation involves a passage from potentiality to actuality. The seed becomes a tree, the stone falls, water evaporates. Each change is a process in which something that could be becomes what is. As we saw earlier, this transition from potential to act is the core of Aristotle's explanation of reality. However, Aristotle then asks, does this chain of movement ever end? Is there an absolute starting point? If everything is moved by something else, we end up with an infinite chain of motion. A moves B, B moves C, C moves D. But such a chain can't go on forever, because an infinite regress explains nothing. it only postpones the explanation. If there were no first mover, nothing would ever have started moving. Therefore, there must be a first principle, a cause that moves everything else without itself being moved. This is the unmoved mover, primum movens immobile. By definition, it is unchanging, eternal, immaterial, and necessary. It has no potentiality because it is pure actuality. There's no possibility of it becoming something else. It has always been fully what it is. That absolute perfection allows it to be the stable center in a universe of constant change. But how can something that doesn't move cause everything else to move? Here lies one of the most brilliant insights in Aristotle's thought. The unmoved mover doesn't move things through physical contact or force. It moves as a final cause, as something that attracts. It moves things the way a desired goal moves us to act, or the way a fixed star guides sailors, by being the object of aspiration and contemplation. The unmoved mover moves as the object of love, Metaphysics 7. Everything in the universe, according to Aristotle, moves toward perfection. All beings strive to realize their potential and reach their complete form. The unmoved mover is the supreme model of perfection. It draws all things toward itself, not by pushing them, but by being the ultimate goal of their movement. It is the final cause of the cosmos, the end toward which all things naturally tend. Another fascinating aspect of this theory is Aristotle's description of the unmoved mover as pure intellect, a being whose only activity is to think about itself eternally. It is pure consciousness, without matter, without change, without lack. The life of the unmoved mover is such as the best life we can live, and such is the life of God, eternal, perfect. For God is pure act, and his activity is the thought of thought. Metaphysics 9. This thought thinking itself is the highest form of being. It doesn't think about changing or external things, but about itself, pure, eternal intellect in act. And that's what makes it divine, perfect, self-sufficient, and everlasting. Through this idea, Aristotle builds a concept of divinity that isn't mythical or religious, but philosophical and necessary. The unmoved mover is the logical conclusion of the structure of being. It doesn't exist outside the world, but it's not part of the physical world either. It exists beyond time, matter, and change. Aristotle even allows for the possibility of multiple celestial movers, in line with the astronomy of his time. Each sphere of the heavens could have its own mover. But even if there are many secondary movers responsible for the motion of the stars, there is only one supreme unmoved mover, the one that moves the entire cosmos as a whole. It is the necessary being, while everything else is contingent. Without it, the universe would have no order, direction, or purpose. The unmoved mover ensures that reality is intelligible, that the world can be known, organized, and explained rationally. The doctrine of the unmoved mover is more than a cosmological theory. It's a metaphysical answer to the questions of origin, purpose, and unity. By establishing an unmoving principle that grounds all motion, Aristotle offers an alternative to randomness, infinite regress, and chaos. At the same time, he avoids falling into mysticism or pure abstraction. The unmoved mover is indeed transcendent, but its existence is necessary for the world to make sense. It represents the unity of being, the foundation that holds together all multiplicity and movement. Centuries later, this idea would deeply influence medieval philosophy. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, identified the unmoved mover with the Christian God and used it as one of his 5 ways to rationally demonstrate God's existence. But even beyond theology, the idea of an eternal, pure, and absolute principle remains one of the greatest contributions of ancient philosophy. It invites us to look beyond immediate causes, to seek what gives order, coherence, and meaning to existence. In the end, the concept of the unmoved mover is both a destination and a starting point, a call to contemplate being in its totality, not as a chain of random events, but as a cosmos guided by a supreme principle that moves everything simply by being fully what it is. What makes us truly human? Is it reason, language, morality? For Aristotle, the answer involves all of these, but it takes on a specific and surprisingly modern form. The human being is, by nature, a political animal. This famous statement appears in his work, Politics, and reveals one of the most powerful ideas in Aristotelian philosophy. But to understand it fully, we need to look beyond the phrase itself, to the deeper meaning behind it. Aristotle isn't just talking about social behavior, but about the very structure of human existence in community. When Aristotle says that man is a political animal, zoon politikon, he isn't praising politics as we think of it today, parties, elections, or government. Nor is he simply saying that humans are social creatures. He means something far deeper. Life in society isn't an artificial choice. It's an expression of our very essence. For Aristotle, everything in nature moves toward fulfilling its purpose, its telos. Just as a seed naturally grows into a tree, the human being naturally tends toward life in community. And the most complete form of that community is the polis, the Greek city-state. The polis isn't just a group of people living together. It's the highest form of association, the one that makes a full and virtuous life possible. The family is the first unit, then comes the village, and finally, the city. This progression is natural. Aristotle writes, "The city is by nature prior to the individual." Politics, I, 2. That doesn't mean the individual has no value. It means we can only reach our full realization within a political community. Outside of it, a person isn't fully human. He would be either a god, self-sufficient and above others, or a beast, incapable of living by reason. Another key aspect of our political nature is language. All animals communicate in some way, through sounds, signals, or gestures, but only human beings have logos, rational speech, which allows us to express ideas like justice and injustice, good and evil, benefit and harm. This is not a small detail. It's the foundation of political life. Living in community isn't just about sharing space. It means deliberating together about what is right, fair, and necessary. And that's only possible because we have language, and with it, a moral sense. That's why Aristotle sees language as the most noble political function of human beings. We don't just talk, we argue, persuade, debate, and make laws. Life in society, therefore, is a rational and ethical exercise, not just a matter of convenience. If humans can only reach their full potential within the polis, it's because that's where we can live according to virtue. Politics, for Aristotle, is not a tool for domination, but the art of promoting the common good. Its ultimate goal is eudaimonia, full happiness, which can only be achieved through an ethical, rational life guided by justice. So, being political doesn't just mean voting, making laws, or governing. It means being an active citizen, someone who takes part in common life with responsibility and awareness. The aim of the city is to enable its citizens to live well. Politics, the Thura 9. In that sense, politics is an extension of ethic. The formation of character, the cultivation of justice, and the education for virtue all take place within the political community, through laws, institutions, and shared practices. The city, for Aristotle, is a moral space, the arena where humanity is refined. He is clear about this. Anyone who lives outside the city by choice, without need, is not fully human. As he famously says, anyone who cannot live in society, or who has no need to because he is self-sufficient, must be either a beast or a god. Politics, I, 2. This line is both provocative and deeply relevant. It reminds us that political exclusion is a form of dehumanization. To deny someone participation, a public voice, or citizenship is to deny part of their very nature. That's why Aristotle's political philosophy is not only descriptive, it's also normative. It explains what humans are, but also what they ought to be. True politics is the one that integrates individuals into common life, respecting their dignity and enabling their ethical fulfillment. Of course, the world has changed since ancient Greece. Aristotle's polis was limited, exclusive, and built on a slave-based society. But the core of his thought remains alive. Politics is an expression of human nature itself. Today, that idea challenges us more than ever. In an age of polarization, individualism, and civic apathy, remembering that we are political by nature invites us to reclaim the public space, to talk, to listen, to participate in building the world together. Politics, in this sense, isn't a burden. It's a privilege. It's where we become most human, not just by coexisting, but by reasoning, acting, and pursuing the common good together. Aristotle taught that a person who lives in isolation is incomplete. We are made to live together, not as a crowd, but as conscious citizens. The challenge, then, is to awaken that political potential within us and make the city once again a space of reason, justice, and virtue. When we talk about politics, it's easy to think of parties, elections, and power struggles. But Aristotle invites us to think more deeply. What is the true purpose of government? And more importantly, what makes a regime just or corrupt? In his work, Politics, Aristotle develops a classification of political systems based on two key questions. How many rule? One, a few, or many. For whom they rule, for the common good, or for their own interest. This analysis isn't just descriptive. It's rooted in his ethical and teleological view of politics. Every government should aim at the common good, at justice, and at the good life for all citizens. When power moves away from that purpose, corruption begins. From this, Aristotle identifies three legitimate forms of government and three corrupt ones. Let's look at each. 1. Monarchy, pure form. Rule by one person, exercised for the benefit of all. It's the highest form of government when led by a wise and virtuous ruler, someone with moral and intellectual excellence. The monarch, in this sense, acts as the father of the city, caring for the well-being of all. Corruption, tyranny. Tyranny arises when the ruler governs only for himself, exploiting the people, suppressing freedoms, and acting out of selfish interest. For Aristotle, this is the worst type of government, because it's the farthest from justice and the most oppressive. Tyranny is the corruption of monarchy, when one rules for his own benefit alone. Politics, I fourth. 2. Aristocracy, pure form. Rule by a few virtuous individuals chosen for their wisdom, experience, and character. Power belongs to the best, aristoi, who govern for the good of all. This system values merit and moral excellence. Corruption, oligarchy. Aristocracy becomes corrupt when the few rule in favor of the rich and powerful, excluding others from political participation. Oligarchy concentrates power in the hands of a small economic elite. Oligarchy is when the rich rule, not because they are the best, but because they possess wealth. Politics, IV 4. 3. Polity, pure form. Rule by many citizens, oriented toward the common good. This isn't democracy in the modern sense, but a balanced system where popular participation coexists with respect for law and reason. Aristotle saw polity, politeia, as the most stable and realistic form of government, a middle ground combining the strengths of oligarchy and democracy, guided by ethics and rationality. Corruption, democracy, in the Aristotelian negative sense. The degeneration of polity happens when the majority governs for its own interest, ignoring laws and pursuing short-term gain. This is what Aristotle calls demagogic democracy, where leaders manipulate the people and decisions are driven by emotion rather than reason. Democracy is when the people govern for their own interests, not for justice for all. Politics, IV 4. It's important to note that Aristotle's use of the word democracy differs from how we use it today. He wasn't against popular participation. He opposed mob rule, where the will of the majority replaces the rule of law, the true measure of justice. For Aristotle, the key question isn't how many people govern, but for whom they govern. The real measure of political justice is whether power is used for the common good or for private interests. This means a monarchy could be more just than a democracy, depending on its purpose. Likewise, an oligarchy could be more destructive than a tyranny if it deepens inequality and excludes most citizens from public life. Aristotle was also concerned with political stability. Corrupt regimes are inherently unstable because they breed resentment, revolts, and cycles of violence. Just regimes, guided by law and reason, last longer because they're based on trust and balanced participation. That's why Aristotle recommends polity as the most secure and balanced form. It avoids the extremes of tyranny and chaotic democracy by blending fair distribution of power with active citizen involvement, always grounded in the rule of law. The role of virtue in politics. Finally, Aristotle reminds us that the quality of government depends on the quality of both the rulers and the ruled. Good politics requires civic virtue, a genuine commitment to justice, respect for laws, and the desire for the common good. The excellence of a citizen consists in knowing how to rule and how to be ruled. Politics 3:4. This means true politics isn't limited to kings, aristocrats, or officials. Every citizen has a role to play, as long as they are educated, virtuous, and responsible participants in public life. Why it still matters. Aristotle's classification of governments remains surprisingly relevant today. In times of political crisis, concentration of power, populism, and manipulation, his philosophy reminds us of the essence of politics, serving the common good. He teaches us to be wary of both charismatic leaders, who govern for themselves, and majorities that act out of impulse or self-interest. And he reminds us that corruption begins not only with money or power, but when we forget the moral purpose of politics. A good form of government, according to Aristotle, isn't the one that pleases everyone. It's the one that achieves justice and promotes the good life for all citizens. That's the direction any legitimate, lasting, and truly human political system must take. For Aristotle, the city, polis, is not an artificial invention or a temporary convenience. It is, above all, the natural culmination of human development. The polis is the place where human beings can fully realize their essence, and that essence, as we've seen, is deeply political. In politics, Aristotle states with conviction, the city exists by nature, and man is by nature a political animal. Politics I-2. This statement doesn't just mean that we live together for practical reason. It goes much deeper. Life in community is the essential condition for becoming fully human. No one achieves their humanity in isolation. Only within the polis do we find the environment where we can exercise reason, develop virtue, seek justice, and live a complete life. For Aristotle, the formation of the polis follows a natural and progressive path. It begins with the most basic unit, the family, oikos, where humans organize themselves to meet immediate needs, shelter, food, protection. Then, several families join to form a village, which strengthens social bonds and offers greater security. But only with the creation of the city does full self-sufficiency emerge, the ability to depend on nothing outside itself in order to live well. Thus, the polis is not the result of a contract or an imposed agreement, as some modern philosophers would later suggest. It is the outcome of human nature itself unfolding. Aristotle writes, "The city is the complete realization of human nature, for it is the end toward which its development naturally tends." Politics I-2. This means the city is much more than a physical space. It is a moral community, a network of citizens united by laws, values, institutions, and shared purposes. Aristotle clearly distinguishes between two kinds of life: living simply, Zen; surviving, meeting basic needs; living well, Euzen; fulfilling our nature through reason, virtue, and participation in common life. The city doesn't exist just to make life possible. It exists to make a good life possible. As Aristotle puts it, the purpose of the city is not only to live, but to live well. Politics, the third 9. This idea is central. The polis is where humans can develop reason, ethics, language, and a sense of justice. Everything that distinguishes us from other animals. The city isn't an artificial creation, it's the highest expression of our nature. In Aristotle's view, being a citizen doesn't simply mean living within the city's borders. A true citizen is someone who takes part in political life, who uses reason in public debate, and who contributes to the common good. Citizenship is not just about rights, it's about ethical and civic responsibility. We call a citizen one who shares in the government and decisions of the city. Politics 3:1. The city, therefore, is not a place for selfishness or isolation. It is the space of deliberation, law, justice, and shared virtue. Each citizen finds fulfillment not only in private life, but in common life, through engagement with others, and through the pursuit of just decisions. One of the elements that make the city possible and lasting is law. For Aristotle, law is reason free from passion, the force that organizes coexistence and guides citizens toward virtue. Law allows the city to function not as a clash of individual desires, but as a rational and just order. Where the law does not rule, there is no city. Politics IV 4. In the polis, life is guided by common rules that balance freedom with responsibility, individual desire with the collective good. Law is the thread that binds citizens together and makes them members of the same moral community. If the city is the natural fulfillment of human life, then its corruption is also a form of human decline. For Aristotle, political regimes that lose sight of the common good, such as tyranny, oligarchy, or corrupt democracy, not only distort government, but also prevent individuals from realizing their own nature. Poorly organized cities that foster inequality, injustice, or indifference produce incomplete, dehumanized citizens. That's why Aristotle's study of the polis is not only political, but also ethical and educational. Its goal is to form citizens capable of living with dignity, responsibility, and moral excellence. A possible ideal? It's true that Aristotle's polis doesn't correspond to the modern concept of the state. It was limited, elitist, and excluded many groups. But the heart of his political philosophy remains strikingly relevant. Human life can only be fully realized in organized coexistence, guided by reason and the pursuit of the common good. Today, our cities are very different, but the challenge remains the same. How can we turn public space into a place for good living? How can we build institutions that teach virtue, promote justice, and encourage citizens to participate actively? The answer may lie in the essence of Aristotle's polis itself, a shared ethical project in which each person finds meaning by serving the whole, not out of obligation, but by nature. For Aristotle, the city is the means through which we become fully human. Outside it, we are merely surviving. Within it, when it is well ordered, we are citizens, rational, moral, active, and fulfilled beings. For Aristotle, no city can be truly just, stable, or virtuous unless it forms virtuous citizens. Good politics depends on the good character of the people who make it up. But character, contrary to what many think, isn't something we're born with. It must be shaped, educated, and guided by reason. That's why two elements are absolutely essential in Aristotle's political philosophy: education and laws. Both, in his view, are instruments of civic virtue, the formation of citizens who live not just for themselves, but for the common good. Citizens who act with justice, moderation, courage, and prudence, and who understand that their personal fulfillment is deeply tied to the life of the city. In both politics and Nicomachean ethics, Aristotle insists that education is the way through which virtuous habits are formed. No one becomes just, courageous, or prudent by nature. We are by nature only capable of virtue, but that potential only becomes real if it's cultivated early in life. Moral virtue is acquired by habit. Therefore, education must begin from childhood. For Aristotle, education is not just the transmission of information or technical skills. It is, above all, an ethical and political formation. It involves the body, the soul, emotions, and reason. It means learning to desire what is good, to act with balance, to respect the laws, and to participate responsibly in public life. He believed that the state should be responsible for this formation because the purpose of the city is not merely to ensure safety or stability, but to promote the good life for all citizens. And the good life is only possible among virtuous people. Aristotle had a deeply integrated view of the human being and the city. For him, ethics, individual life, and politics, collective life, are inseparable. A citizen who lives in a disorderly, selfish, or unjust way is not just a problem for himself. He is a threat to the whole community. That's why the education of the young is a public matter, not a private one. The way children are raised shapes the future character of the city, and a city will only be good if its citizens are good. As Aristotle puts it, the state must care more for the formation of citizens' character than for anything else. Education, then, is not optional. It is the foundation of citizenship. And not only for the young, Aristotle believed that adult life also requires continuous learning, the practice of virtue, and constant self-improvement. But education alone is not enough. For Aristotle, something else is needed. Laws. They are the tools that guide and regulate life in common, yet their value goes beyond punishment or order. Laws have a pedagogical function. Law has the power to compel, and it is law that forms good habits. This means that well-crafted laws educate citizens through habit, encouraging good actions, discouraging vice, and shaping behavior over time. Ideally, the law should not only forbid evil, but also promote good. It should serve as a rational guide, not merely as an instrument of fear or control. Aristotle believed that a good legislator is, above all, a collective educator. He understands human nature, knows the virtues, and designs laws to help form balanced, just, and active citizens. It's worth remembering that for Aristotle, obeying just laws is not the opposite of freedom. It is true freedom. When a citizen acts according to reason and lives in harmony with the law, he is not being oppressed. He is fulfilling his rational and political nature. In a well-ordered city, laws are the expression of collective reason. They help individuals overcome disordered impulses, cultivate self-control, and act for the good of the community. Thus, the law becomes a bridge between personal ethics and social justice. Aristotle warns that laws and education must go hand in hand. A city with good laws but uneducated citizens will be unstable, and a city that tries to educate without the support of laws will lack strength and continuity. Good legislation should support good education, and vice versa. Only then is it possible to form virtuous citizens and a just city. That's why Aristotle recommended that public education be structured by the state, according to the same principles that guide the city's constitution. Even though he lived in 4th century BCE Greece, Aristotle offers a message that's still incredibly relevant today. Political crisis is often a crisis of character. When citizens are not educated in virtue, corruption spreads, self-interest takes over the public sphere, and laws lose their moral power. In this context, recovering the value of civic education and laws oriented toward the common good is not just a technical issue. It's a matter of survival for authentic political life. For Aristotle, a well-governed city is not one that merely imposes order, but one that shapes souls, builds character, guides desires, and leads its citizens toward a full life. Education and laws are not mechanisms of control. They are instruments of liberation and moral excellence. For Aristotle, ethics and politics are not separate disciplines. They are deeply connected by one fundamental truth. It's impossible to form good citizens without forming good people, and it's impossible to live ethically in the fullest sense outside political life. Ethics deals with the good life of the individual. Politics deals with the good life of the community. Both share the same ultimate goal: the fulfillment of human nature through virtue. This close connection between the individual and the collective is at the heart of Aristotle's philosophy. Unlike many modern thinkers, he doesn't see politics as a struggle for power, nor ethics as a purely private morality disconnected from reality. For him, the good life is a shared life, and it is within the polis, the well-ordered city, that human beings find the right conditions to fully develop their character. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle defines ethics as the pursuit of eudaimonia, human happiness or flourishing. But this happiness is not about fleeting pleasure or subjective emotion. It's about realizing the full potential of our rational nature through the cultivation of virtues. Virtues, for Aristotle, are habits formed through practice and guided by reason. Courage, justice, temperance, prudence. None of these are innate. They are developed over time through education, experience, and constant effort. The virtuous person is one who chooses what is good consistently and consciously, finding balance between extremes. But ethics doesn't develop in a vacuum. Humans don't live in isolation. We live in communities shaped by laws, customs, and institutions. And it's exactly here that ethics meets politics. In politics, Aristotle states that the city exists to make the good life possible. That means politics must aim at the moral formation of its citizens. It's not enough to organize power, create laws, or maintain order. True politics educates the community, forming individuals capable of living well, both for themselves and for others. The end of the city is the good, and the city exists not only to live, but to live well. Politics 3:9. This is one of Aristotle's most original and demanding ideas. The politician is, in a sense, a collective educator. He doesn't just govern, he helps shape the moral character of the citizens. Laws, institutions, and traditions should all be structured to promote moral excellence. That's why Aristotle emphasizes the importance of legislation and public education. The city must create conditions for ethics to flourish, beginning with the education of the young and extending to the organization of laws and justice. In a well-ordered city, ethics and politics strengthen each other. But what exactly makes someone a good citizen, according to Aristotle? A citizen is someone who participates in political life, who exercises rights, fulfills duties, and takes part in public decision-making. But not just any participation is enough. The true citizen acts with virtue, guided by reason and a commitment to the common good. The excellence of a citizen consists in knowing how to rule and how to be ruled. Politics 3:4. So, forming a citizen requires both moral and political virtues. One must have courage to defend justice, temperance to resist corruption, and prudence to deliberate for the good of the community. These virtues aren't acquired through good intentions alone. They are developed through social interaction, debate, and civic experience. That's why individual ethics depends on politics, just as politics depends on ethics. A just government can only exist with virtuous citizens, and virtuous citizens can only grow in a city that promotes justice, education, and participation. Many thinkers after Aristotle tried to separate ethics from politics, treating politics as the realm of power and realism, and ethics as a private matter of personal conscience. Aristotle rejects this divide. For him, to live well is to live ethically with others, to exercise freedom with responsibility, and use reason to build a just community. In that sense, politics is the continuation of ethics by other means. Political life is where moral ideals take form, where justice becomes law, prudence becomes public policy, and courage becomes civic action. This unity between ethics and politics doesn't erase conflict, but it provides a vision, the ideal of a city where each person's good is tied to the good of all, a city where individual happiness is only possible within a just and well-ordered community. Today, that vision might sound demanding, but it's also liberating. It reminds us that life is not just about existing, but about living with purpose and participation. That morality is not a private luxury, but a public necessity, and that the true citizen is not a spectator, but an ethical and political agent. Aristotle teaches that the destiny of a city is linked to the character of its people. Justice, freedom, and happiness are not accidents. They are achievements born from reason, virtue, and commitment to the common good. For Aristotle, the formation of the citizen is the highest union of ethics and politics, the art of living well, with others, and for oneself. Contrary to what people often think, physics for Aristotle wasn't just a branch of natural science as we know it today. In his philosophy, physics was a philosophical science, a way to investigate the principles, causes, and structure of natural reality. It was concerned not only with what we see, but why things move, change, and exist in the physical world. In his work, Physics, Physicae, Aristotle defines the field of natural investigation with remarkable depth. For him, physics studies being in motion. Everything that comes into existence changes and eventually ceases to be. It is the study of physis, a Greek word meaning nature, but more literally, that which grows by itself. Nature is a principle of motion and rest existing within things that have in themselves this principle. This definition shows that Aristotle sees nature as an internal principle, not something imposed from the outside. A seed becomes a tree because it carries within itself the principle of growth. An animal moves, feels, and acts because it has within its essence the dynamism of life. Physics, therefore, doesn't just observe phenomena, it seeks to understand their causes and purposes. The central idea of Aristotelian physics is motion, kinesis. But motion here doesn't just mean spatial movement, it includes any form of change, growth, decay, alteration, generation, or destruction. Everything that changes in some way participates in motion. To explain this process, Aristotle uses his famous distinction between potentiality and actuality. Motion, he says, is the actualization of a potential, the process by which something that can be becomes what it is. For example, when wood becomes a table, it goes from the potential of being a table to the actuality of being one. That transition is motion. Understanding how this happens, what causes it, and according to which principles, is the task of physics. Motion is the actuality of what exists potentially, as such. Though technical, this definition captures the depth of Aristotle's thinking. Motion isn't chaotic or mechanical. It's an ordered process with causes and purposes, guided by its own logic. Aristotle's physics cannot be separated from his theory of the four causes: material, formal, efficient, and final. To truly understand any natural phenomenon, one must ask, what is it made of? Material cause. What is it? Formal cause. Who or what produced it? Efficient cause. What is it for? Final cause. This makes Aristotelian physics teleological, that is, oriented toward ends or purposes. Nothing in nature happens by accident. Everything has an inner goal. A rock falls because it tends toward the center of the earth. Plants grow toward the fulfillment of their form. Animals act to survive and reproduce. Nature is ordered and purposeful. Aristotle also talks about natural substances, beings that contain within themselves a principle of motion. These include living beings, but also physical elements like water, fire, air, and earth. These elements, he believed, could transform into one another through the interaction of heat, cold, dryness, and moisture. Ideas that, though outdated today, helped explain evaporation, combustion, or freezing in his time. What matters most is not the scientific accuracy, but the philosophical method. The effort to understand nature through its inner principles, not just its visible effects. When studying motion, Aristotle also had to think about time and place. He defines time as the number of motion in respect of before and after. Physics, IV 11. In other words, time isn't something that exists independently of motion. It's a measure of change in the world. Without motion, there is no time. Likewise, space, topos in Greek, is not an empty void. but the place a body occupies, always in relation to other bodies. Aristotle rejected the idea of a vacuum, believing that everything that exists must occupy a specific place. Space is always relational, and time is always tied to change. With that, he built a physics grounded in experience but guided by reason. Of course, Aristotle's physics has its limits. He didn't know about gravity, thermodynamics, or relativity. His concepts of motion, space, and time were later surpassed by Galileo, Newton, and Einstein. Yet his achievement lies in being the first to systematically study nature as a field of rational inquiry. More importantly, Aristotle gave us a vision of the natural world as ordered, purposeful, and intelligible. For him, to study nature is to seek the logos that shapes it, the rational structure of reality itself. Physics, then, is not just a technical science, it is a path to understanding being in its most dynamic expression. To study nature for Aristotle is also to learn to respect it. Nothing is random. Everything has a beginning, a process, and an end. This understanding inspires a philosophical attitude toward reality, a mix of wonder, contemplation, and curiosity. Nature does nothing in vain. That phrase captures the spirit of Aristotelian physics. Nature is an open book, but it requires effort to read. It's not a collection of disconnected facts, but a living system of causes and purposes. To understand it is, ultimately, to understand how being itself is realized through motion, form, and purpose. Why are things in nature the way they are? Why does a seed grow into a tree? Why do animals seek shelter, food, and reproduction? And why do human beings strive to live well? For Aristotle, the answer lies in one of the central ideas of his natural philosophy, teleology. In Greek, telos means end, goal, or purpose. So, when we say that nature is teleological, we mean that everything in nature has an end toward which it naturally tends. This view doesn't come from blind faith or superstition. It comes from careful observation. By studying living beings, natural elements, and processes of change, Aristotle noticed a clear pattern. Everything that exists has an internal direction. Nothing happens by chance. Each being has its own form and essence, and that essence guides its development toward its proper end. Aristotelian teleology is directly connected to his theory of the four causes. In addition to the material cause, what something is made of, the formal cause, what something is, and the efficient cause, what brings it about, Aristotle introduces the final cause, the purpose for which something exists. The final cause is the cause of causes. To fully understand reality, it's not enough to know how or from what something is made. We must also know why. Nature doesn't act randomly. It acts with a built-in purpose, and that purpose is the fulfillment of each being's essence. A seed exists to become a tree. The eye exists to see. A bird's wings exist to fly. The heart exists to pump blood. Every part of a living organism has a function, and that function is its natural end. The same applies to natural processes in general. Look at a river. It flows towards the sea. Fire rises. Stones fall. Ice melts with heat. Everything has a direction, a natural movement oriented towards some form of realization or balance. For Aristotle, this order doesn't come from outside, as if some external force were pulling the strings. It's internal to the things themselves. The nature of each being includes its own final tendency, and that's what allows it to develop, change, and act consistently with what it is. In Aristotle's time, some philosophical schools rejected this idea of purpose in nature. The atomists, like Democritus and Leucippus, believed that everything in the universe resulted from random combinations of atoms without purpose, order, or direction. The world, to them, was just a cosmic accident. Aristotle strongly disagreed. For him, chance cannot be the foundation of reality. Chance exists, yes, but only as an exception, not as the rule. The regularity of natural phenomena, the complexity of living organisms, and the functional design of body parts all point to an intentional order in nature. To say that chance is the primary cause of natural phenomena is to deny the very science of nature. If everything were the result of chance, there would be no regularity, no predictability, no science. The very possibility of understanding the world depends on the world being organized by purposes. When it comes to human beings, teleology reaches an even higher level. As we've seen in Aristotle's Ethics and Politics, humans also have a natural end, eudaimonia, happiness understood as the full realization of our rational nature. Just as the eye is made for seeing, humans are made for reasoning and living virtuously. This purpose isn't imposed from outside, it comes from within. We are naturally drawn to seek the good, to live in community, to develop our potential. That pursuit gives meaning to our lives. Education, politics, laws, and culture, therefore, should be organized to help people reach their natural end. To live according to our purpose is to live well. To deny that purpose is to live against our own nature. A common modern objection to teleology is that it seems to limit freedom, as if everything were already predetermined. But for Aristotle, purpose doesn't take away freedom, it guides it. Knowing why we exist helps us choose better, live more consciously, and avoid the paths that lead us away from fulfillment. True freedom, for Aristotle, isn't doing whatever we want, it's doing what fulfills our rational and moral nature. We are free when we choose the good, and we choose the good when we understand the purpose of things, including our own. In today's world, dominated by mechanical, reductionist, and fragmented explanations of reality, Aristotle's teleological view may sound outdated, but it reminds us of something essential. The universe is not chaos. There is order, structure, and direction. More importantly, it invites us to ask, what is the purpose of things? What is my purpose? These questions are not just philosophical, they're deeply human, and perhaps, in trying to answer them with reason and courage, we finally become what we were meant to be. Long before modern science talked about atoms, there was a Greek philosopher who proposed a bold idea, Democritus of Abdera. He claimed that everything in the universe is made up of atoms and empty space. Invisible, indivisible, and eternal, these atoms move randomly through the void, colliding and combining to form every being and phenomenon in nature. To many people today, this might sound surprisingly close to modern physics, but for Aristotle, this explanation was deeply flawed and incomplete. His critique of atomic theory wasn't about rejecting matter or multiplicity. It was about something more essential, the search for real causes and rational explanations that take into account form, purpose, and substance. Democritus, following his teacher Leucippus, tried to solve a major philosophical problem of the time: how to explain change and diversity without falling into contradiction. Parmenides had argued that being is and non-being is not, meaning that the void, non-being, could not exist. If that were true, change would be impossible. It would be an illusion. To overcome this, the atomists introduced the idea of the void as a physical reality, a space in which eternal, unchangeable atoms move and collide. Everything we see, trees, stones, animals, stars, would just be different arrangements of these atoms. They also denied any purpose in nature. For Democritus, the universe was the result of chance and mechanical necessity, without order, purpose, or intelligence. Aristotle completely rejected this view. He believed atomic theory oversimplified reality, ignoring the essential aspects that make something what it is. In his work Physics, Aristotle argued that the atomist's explanation failed because it reduced all phenomena to quantity, position, and motion. For him, that approach ignored what truly mattered: form, substance, quality, and especially purpose. The atomists explain the world only in terms of necessity and accident, but they ignore the true why of things, their natural end. In other words, Aristotle criticized Democritus for denying the final cause. the natural purpose or reason for a thing's existence. In Aristotle's philosophy, everything that exists has a formal structure and a tendency to fulfill its essence. But in Democritus's theory, everything happens through blind collisions of particles. To Aristotle, that explanation stripped the world of meaning, order, and intelligibility. Another major point in Aristotle's critique was that atomic theory left no room for form as a principle of being. The atomists believed everything was made of the same substance, atoms, and that differences between things came only from variations in position, number, and arrangement. Aristotle thought that was a serious mistake. For him, what defines a substance isn't just its material, but its form, the structure that organizes that material. A horse, a stone, or a house isn't just a pile of parts. It has an internal organization, an essence that makes it what it is. Without considering form, Aristotle said, we can't explain why one thing differs from another, or why each being has a natural development, a function, and a purpose. Reducing everything to raw matter and random movement erases the richness and complexity of reality. He also saw a deeper philosophical flaw in Democritus's theory, the idea that the universe came about by chance. According to the atomists, atoms move randomly, and the order of the world emerged spontaneously without direction or final cause. For Aristotle, that was unacceptable. The regularity of natural phenomena, the organization of living beings, the functionality of organs, the harmony between means and ends, all of this pointed to an underlying order in nature. To say that chance is the primary cause of things is to deny the very science of nature. Nature, for Aristotle, acts with purpose. The heart beats to pump blood. Eyes exist to see. Seeds grow into trees. None of this can be explained by random collision. Nature acts as if it aimed at an end, and it is the philosopher's task to understand that end, not to deny it. Finally, Aristotle criticized the atomists for believing that knowledge comes only from the senses and the observation of material parts. For him, true knowledge means understanding the causes and principles of being, including form, purpose, and substance. Knowing how things work isn't enough. We must also know why they are the way they are. That answer, Aristotle said, isn't found in atoms, but in the rational study of the structures of being. Conclusion. Why did Aristotle reject atomism? Aristotle didn't reject matter or the study of the physical world. On the contrary, he helped lay the foundation for scientific thought. But he believed that atomism reduced reality to what can be measured, ignoring essence, form, and purpose. His critique was, above all, a call for depth. To truly understand nature, it's not enough to know what it's made of. We must know what it is and why it exists. Reality, for Aristotle, isn't a meaningless cloud of particles. It's a cosmos, an ordered, intelligible whole, where every being has its place, its form, and its purpose. That vision is what anchors his entire philosophy of nature. When we look at the world around us, we feel that time passes and that everything occupies a place in space. These two ideas, time and space, seem so obvious that we rarely stop to think about what they really are. But for Aristotle, nothing should be accepted without investigation. That's why he offers a deep and original analysis of these concepts in his work Physics. Earlier philosophers, especially the pre-Socratics, spoke about time and space in vague or mythic terms. Aristotle, however, gives them a rational explanation, closely tied to movement and real experience. He saw both time and space as inseparable from the changing reality of the natural world, and therefore they must be understood through the lens of motion itself. Aristotle didn't use the word space the way we do today. Instead, he spoke of place, topos, which he defined as the position a body occupies in relation to other bodies. Place isn't an empty or absolute void. It's always tied to the body that contains it. Place is the boundary of the body that contains another body. In other words, for Aristotle, space doesn't exist as a kind of nothing that stands on its own. Every place is always the place of something. If there's no body, there's no place. The universe, therefore, isn't a hollow container where bodies move around freely. It's a system of ordered relationships between bodies. This idea is very different from the concept of absolute space later proposed by Newton. Aristotle rejected the idea of a vacuum, believing that nature does not allow emptiness. Everything that exists in something, with something, for something. Space, then, isn't an independent substance, but a relational condition that only makes sense in connection with physical body. When it comes to time, Aristotle also offered an explanation that broke away from simplistic or purely mathematical views. He observed that everything in nature is in constant change, being born, growing, aging, moving, transforming. For him, time is the number of motion in respect of before and after. This definition is powerful. Time isn't an independent entity that flows on its own. It's a measure the mind applies to motion. We perceive time because we perceive change, because we can distinguish a sequence of events. If nothing moved or changed, there would be no time. This idea puts Aristotle between two extremes. Parmenides, who believed motion was an illusion and therefore time didn't exist, and the atomists, who thought time was just an endless series of disconnected, indivisible moments. For Aristotle, time is real, but it's not a substance. It's an aspect of motion perceived by a rational being, one capable of counting, ordering, and distinguishing phases of change. Without a mind able to perceive before and after, there would be no conscious time. One of Aristotle's most fascinating insights is that time depends on the soul. This doesn't mean time is an illusion, but that it can only be recognized and measured by a rational observer. Motion exists objectively, but time as a measure of that motion requires perception. If there were no soul, there would be no time. This thought anticipates, in a way, modern reflections on the perception of time. For Aristotle, we don't live in time as if it were some cold, external stage. Time is connected to our consciousness, to how we perceive change and give meaning to the sequence of things. Thus, time is not only a physical phenomenon, but also an existential. We measure time through movement, like the sun's path, the motion of stars, or the ticking of a clock. But we feel time in the soul, as memory of the past, awareness of the present, and expectation of the future. Even though time is linked to change, Aristotle also recognized the existence of an eternal and unmoving being, the unmoved mover. Because this being is beyond motion, it's also beyond time. It is pure actuality, without succession, without before and after, without transformation. This distinction is key. Everything in the physical world exists in time, because it's subject to change and movement. But the ultimate foundation of reality, the source that moves everything without being moved, transcends time. Time belongs to nature, but not to the absolute being. Aristotle's conception of time and space isn't just a technical chapter in physics. It's a profound reflection on how being manifests in the natural world. Time and space aren't things separate from reality. They're ways in which movement and existence express themselves. His approach avoids both cold mechanistic thinking and vague mysticism. He teaches us to think of time and space in relation to being, the body, the soul, and reason. This integrative vision turns physics into a philosophical science, an effort to understand reality in its fullness and complexity. Time and space, according to Aristotle, are neither absolute nor illusions. They are real aspects of experience, but they depend on change, body, and rational perception. Time measures motion. Space is the position of the body. Both exist in and through nature, and they are understood by the human intellect, which seeks, through reason, to bring order to the flow of reality. This understanding invites us to look at the world more deeply, because when we grasp how time and space truly work, we also begin to understand our own place in nature, as beings who move, who change, who perceive, and who search through knowledge for what endures. For centuries, Aristotle's picture of the universe was considered the most coherent and rational model for explaining the structure of the cosmos. His cosmology, described mainly in On the Heavens, De Caelo, and Physics, presents a deeply ordered, hierarchical, and geocentric view in which the Earth stands at the center of the universe. But this cosmology isn't just an astronomical model. It's above all a metaphysical expression of Aristotle's vision of nature. The cosmos, for him, isn't a chaotic collection of wandering stars. It's a rational organism where everything has its place, its function, and its purpose. The order of the universe reflects the order of being itself. Aristotle starts from a central conviction. The universe is a finite, spherical, and harmonious whole, governed by its own laws. He rejected the idea of an infinite or chaotic cosmos. Instead, he saw the universe as a closed and complete system, where everything exists for a reason. The heavens are of divine substance and by nature eternal. This statement shows how Aristotle viewed the cosmos not just as matter in motion, but as something that participates in a higher, almost sacred order. Nature, for him, acts according to a principle of purpose, and that purpose extends even to the movement of the stars. The most famous aspect of Aristotle's cosmology is its geocentric model. The Earth is at the center of the universe, unmoving, while all the other celestial bodies revolve around it. But this wasn't a dogmatic belief. It came from philosophical reasoning and careful observation. According to Aristotle, all heavy bodies naturally move toward the center of the universe. The Earth, made of the heaviest elements, earth and water, must therefore occupy that center. The natural motion of each body leads it to its natural place. If the Earth were moving, we wouldn't observe the sky as we do. Thus, the immobility of the Earth was for him both a physical and cosmological necessity, the absolute point of rest around which everything else moves. One of the most original features of Aristotle's cosmology is his division of the universe into two distinct regions. The sublunar world, below the sphere of the moon, where Earth and everything made of the four elements, earth, water, air, and fire, exist. This is the realm of change, imperfection, and decay, the domain of birth, growth, and death. The supralunar world, above the moon, where the stars, planets, and the sun reside. This region is made of a fifth element, ether, and is unchanging, perfect, and eternal. This division reflects a hierarchical view of the cosmos. The heavens are nobler and more perfect than the earth. While everything below changes and dies, everything above remains eternal. Here, physics connects with metaphysics. The motion of the stars symbolizes perfection. Another key point is that the natural motion of celestial bodies is circular and uniform. For Aristotle, the circle is the most perfect form, without beginning or end, without variation, reflecting the eternity of the heavens. The motion of the celestial bodies is eternal, for it is circular. Planets and stars don't move randomly, but follow fixed orbits, as if attached to concentric spheres that rotate around the Earth. Each celestial body is moved by its own sphere, and all spheres are ultimately driven by the unmoved mover, the first principle of motion that moves everything without itself being moved. This idea beautifully unites cosmology and theology. The universe moves out of a desire to imitate the unmoved mover. The pursuit of perfection drives the motion of the heavens. Aristotle's cosmology was later embraced by medieval thinkers, especially Thomas Aquinas, who merged it with Christian theology. It became the foundation of the Ptolemaic system, which dominated astronomy until the 16th century. For over 1,000 years, this vision of the universe was taught as both scientific and theological truth, not because it was imposed by dogma, but because it offered a rational, structured explanation of the cosmos. The universe was seen as a living, hierarchical, and intelligible organism where everything had its rightful place and purpose. With the rise of modern science, through Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and Newton, Aristotle's cosmology was gradually replaced. The geocentric, finite, and layered universe gave way to a heliocentric, infinite cosmos governed by mathematical laws. Yet, even though science moved beyond it, Aristotle's vision still carries a powerful message: the pursuit of order, meaning, and purpose in understanding the universe. His effort to see the cosmos as a rational and organized whole was a crucial step in the birth of both science and philosophy. Aristotle's cosmology isn't just an old astronomical theory, it's a worldview. A universe where nature is ordered, being is structured in levels, and everything, from the smallest body to the most distant star, exists for a reason and a purpose. Even though today we know the Earth revolves around the Sun, and the universe is far larger than Aristotle could imagine, his philosophy still invites us to see the cosmos not as random chaos, but as meaningful order, a reality filled with structure, purpose, and wonder. If Aristotle is known as the founder of formal logic and Western metaphysics, he also deserves another remarkable title in the field of biology: the first great naturalist of ancient philosophy. His passion for life in all its forms led him to observe, describe, and classify an enormous variety of living beings with a level of precision and curiosity unprecedented for his time. Long before biology became a modern science, Aristotle already saw nature as a legitimate field of philosophical investigation. He believed that life couldn't be understood through abstract speculation alone. It required direct observation of the natural world. This commitment to concrete experience, combined with rational analysis, made Aristotle a true pioneer of empirical science. Unlike many of the pre-Socratic philosophers, who tried to explain nature through abstract principles like fire, water, or infinity, Aristotle believed that nature had to be studied through the eyes and the mind. He observed fish, birds, insects, mammals, mollusks, and plants. He performed dissections, gathered reports from fishermen, hunters, and farmers, and traveled to places where he could find unusual species. We must approach nature as investigators, not as mere theorists. This attitude marks a decisive turning point in the history of thought. Aristotle didn't reject reason. He simply believed that knowledge begins with the senses. The philosopher, in his view, wasn't just someone who thought, but someone who looked carefully at the world, collected data, and organized it, seeking patterns, distinctions, and causes. One of Aristotle's most remarkable achievements was his attempt to systematically classify living beings. He noticed essential differences among animals in their structure, lifestyles, diets, types of blood, habitats, and, most importantly, the presence or absence of certain capacities of the soul. Based on these criteria, he proposed a basic division between animals with blood, roughly corresponding to what we now call vertebrates, and animals without blood, comparable to invertebrates. Within these categories, he identified more specific groups such as mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, insects, crustaceans, mollusks. This classification wasn't just a descriptive list. Aristotle wanted to understand the structure and function of organs and how they related to each animal's way of life. He asked questions such as, why do some animals have lungs while others don't? Why do some lay eggs while others give birth to live young? What is the relationship between form and function? In his work, On the Soul, De Anima, Aristotle presents a foundational idea for understanding life. The soul, psyche, is the vital principle that animates the body. All living beings have a soul, but not all souls are the same. He identified three main types: vegetative soul, present in plants, responsible for nutrition, growth, and reproduction; sensitive soul, present in animals, adds perception, movement, and desire; rational soul, unique to humans, introduces reason and abstract thought. This distinction has direct implications for the classification of living beings. The more complex the soul, the greater the degree of autonomy, perception, and intentional behavior. Aristotle thus built a hierarchy of life, not just physical, but also functional and teleological, that is, oriented toward each being's natural purpose. For Aristotle, every living being was guided by an internal end. The hand exists to grasp, the eye to see, the heart to pump blood. Every organ has a function. and that function is its reason for being. Aristotle's biology, like his physics, is teleological. Living beings aren't accidental machines, but organized structures striving to fulfill their purpose. Nature does nothing in vain. This phrase sums up his approach to life. Everything in nature has a reason, a structure, and a purpose. Biology, therefore, must study how the parts relate to the whole and how each living being achieves its natural end. Of course, many of Aristotle's biological claims were later proven wrong. He believed, for instance, that the brain's function was to cool the blood and that men had more teeth than women. But we must remember that his method was in its infancy. He had no modern instruments, no genetics, and no experimental method as we understand it today. Even with those limitations, Aristotle laid the foundations of descriptive and comparative biology, influencing scholars and naturalists for centuries. His work was revisited and expanded by thinkers such as Galen, Avicenna, Thomas Aquinas, and much later, even by Charles Darwin, who admired Aristotle's insight into the continuity between form, function, and adaptation. Aristotle's contribution to biology wasn't just in his observations and classifications. It was in his philosophical attitude toward life. He taught that nature can and should be understood rationally, that living beings have order, structure, and purpose, and that true knowledge requires both sensory experience and philosophical reflection. More than a philosopher of logic or metaphysics, Aristotle was someone who looked at the world with curious eyes and an open mind, someone who believed life itself is worthy of study because it is, in its very essence, a manifestation of being striving for fulfillment. Among Aristotle's most profound and foundational works is his treatise De Anima, On the Soul. Unlike religious or dualistic views that separate the soul and body as if they were two independent substances, Aristotle offers a bold and deeply unified theory. The soul is the form of the body. It isn't a ghost in the machine, nor something that inhabits the body like a temporary tenant. It's the principle that makes the body a living being. To understand what the soul is, Aristotle takes an ontological approach. We must first understand what a living being is, how it acts, feels, grows, and thinks. The soul isn't something detached from matter. It's what gives structure, purpose, and vital activity to an organic body. The unity between soul and body, therefore, is essential. They are not two separate things, but one single being expressed through two inseparable principles. Aristotle begins his inquiry by asking, what is the soul? His answer is framed within his broader theory of act and potentiality. He writes, the soul is the first actuality of a natural body having life potentially within it. This statement carries a precise technical meaning. For Aristotle, the body is matter. It has the potential for life. The soul is act. It actualizes that potential and makes the matter alive. Thus, the soul is what makes the body a living being rather than a lifeless organism. It is the principle of life, organization, and activity. Through the soul, a body can grow, nourish itself, perceive, desire, move, and think. But it's important to note, the soul is not a separate substance that enters the body. It's the form that gives the body its unity and functionality as a living being. Just as sight is the function of the eye, the soul is the function, or essence, of the living body as a whole. One of Aristotle's greatest contributions is his classification of souls according to their level of complexity and function in living beings. He identifies three main types. Vegetative soul, present in all living things, including plants. It governs the basic functions of life, nutrition, growth, and reproduction. It is the simplest and most fundamental level of life. Sensitive soul, present in animals. In addition to vegetative functions, it adds sensation, desire, movement, and the ability to experience pleasure and pain. Through this soul, animals interact with and respond to their environment. Rational soul, unique to human beings. Beyond vegetative and sensitive functions, humans have the ability to reason, deliberate, make choices, and seek universal knowledge. It is the rational soul that makes us truly human. This hierarchy reveals a gradual view of life, where each higher level contains the capacities of the lower ones. Humanity, therefore, isn't something separate from nature, but rather the highest point of a continuous scale of living beings. For Aristotle, most functions of the soul cannot exist without the body. Nutrition, sensation, movement, and desire all depend on bodily organs. The soul, as the form of the body, doesn't survive as an independent substance, except perhaps in the case of rational thought. The soul, or at least certain parts of it, cannot be separated from the body. However, Aristotle leaves open a possible exception regarding the nous, intellect, especially the nous poietikos, active intellect, which he describes as impassible, separate, incorporeal, and eternal. This passage remains one of the most debated in the history of Aristotelian philosophy, since it suggests that part of the soul might transcend the body, even though Aristotle never fully develops a clear doctrine of individual immortality. Still, the core of his theory remains: the soul is the form of the living body, and it can only be understood in relation to the organic structure it animates. With this approach, Aristotle breaks away from Plato's dualism, which viewed the soul as an independent and immortal substance temporarily trapped in the body. For Plato, the body was a prison for the soul. For Aristotle, the body is the condition of the soul's activity in the world. This difference marks a turning point in the history of philosophy. Aristotle inaugurates a naturalistic and integrated view of the human being, where body and soul are not in conflict but in harmony. Humanity is not a fallen angel trapped in matter, but a rational being embodied in nature, part of the physical world, yet capable of transcending it through reason. The theory of the soul as the form of the body has far-reaching consequences. In ethics, it shows that virtue is a disposition of the rational soul in harmony with the body and desires. Rational control over impulses doesn't deny the body. It guides it toward its best expression. In biology, it provides an explanatory model of life as an internal organizing principle that directs development, behavior, and purpose. In education, it reinforces the importance of shaping the soul through habits, balanced emotions, and cultivated reason. A well-formed soul requires practice, body, and guidance. For Aristotle, the soul isn't a mystical or magical entity. It's the vital principle that organizes and animates living matter. As the form of the body, it helps us understand what it means to be alive, to feel, to desire, to move, and, in the human case, to think and seek truth. This integrated view of the human being, as a body animated by a rational soul, remains one of the most enduring contributions of ancient philosophy and a solid foundation for reflecting on life, consciousness, identity, and our place in nature. In his work De Anima, on the soul, Aristotle presents one of the most influential and lasting ideas in philosophy: the division of the soul's functions into three fundamental levels: vegetative, sensitive, and rational. This three-part structure not only organizes the different modes of life found in nature, but also establishes a hierarchy that culminates in the human being as the highest form of life. More than just a classification, Aristotle's goal is to understand what it truly means to live. For him, the soul, psyche, is the vital principle that gives life to the body and allows it to be a living being. But not all living things live in the same way. Some only grow and reproduce. Others can feel, move, and desire. And only one kind of being can think: the human being. Each function of the soul expresses a specific dimension of life and a distinct level of complexity. 1. The vegetative soul, the basic level of life. The vegetative soul is the simplest and most universal function of the soul. It exists in all living things, including plants. Aristotle says this soul is responsible for three basic activities: nutrition, the ability to take in nourishment and sustain life; growth, the process of development over time. Reproduction, the continuation of the species through new individual. Even plants have a soul, for they possess within themselves the principle of growth and reproduction. This function of the soul doesn't involve sensation or movement. Plants don't feel pain, seek pleasure, or have awareness of their surroundings. Yet, they live. The vegetative soul is therefore the minimum condition for life, the foundation upon which all higher forms of life are built. It teaches us that, in the most basic sense, to live is to sustain existence and reproduce one's form, even without consciousness or desire. 2. The sensitive soul, the animal level of life. The sensitive soul exists in animals. In addition to the functions of the vegetative soul, animals have higher capacities. Sensation, the ability to perceive the world through the senses, sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. Desire, the natural tendency to seek pleasure and avoid pain. Locomotion, the ability to move voluntarily toward what is useful or necessary. Animals, unlike plants, have perception through the senses, and with it, pleasure and pain and desire. With sensation comes a new dimension of existence, awareness of the environment, intentional behavior, and response to stimuli. A dog feels hunger, seeks food, recognizes its owner, and reacts to threats. It doesn't think rationally, but it does have a sensitive consciousness, an inner world shaped by perceptions and impulses. Aristotle also notes that higher animals possess rudimentary memory and imagination, allowing them to learn from experience. However, they cannot reason or choose based on moral principles. The sensitive soul, then, represents an intermediate level between purely biological life and rational life. 3. The rational soul, the human level of life. The rational soul is unique to human beings. It includes all the previous functions: nutrition, growth, reproduction, sensation, desire, and movement, but adds what defines us as a species: reason, logos. Aristotle divides the rational soul into two aspects: practical reason, the ability to deliberate about actions, make choices, and act according to values and goals; theoretical reason, the ability to contemplate truth, investigate causes, and seek knowledge for its own sake. Man is the only animal that possesses logos. Through reason, the human being becomes self-aware. He not only feels but knows that he feels. He not only desires but can reflect on his desires. He can control impulses, choose between alternatives, act wisely, and live rationally and ethically. The rational soul makes possible philosophy, science, art, law, and education. It turns the human being into a political animal, capable of living in community under laws and shared principles. For Aristotle, this rational capacity is the highest fulfillment of nature, and it is through it that we achieve eudaimonia, a full and happy life, guided by excellence of reason. The hierarchy of life. Aristotle's threefold division of the soul shows that nature is a continuous and ordered system, where each being has its proper place according to its form and function. There is no rupture between the realms of life, but a natural gradation. Plants have only the vegetative soul. Animals have vegetative and sensitive souls. Humans possess all three, with the rational soul as the highest. This hierarchy doesn't mean the lower levels are inferior or worthless, but that nature develops progressively, always aiming to fulfill its potential. In humans, that fulfillment occurs when reason governs the senses and directs life toward the good. Broader implications. This triple structure of the soul has consequences that reach far beyond biology. It forms the foundation of Aristotelian ethics, where the virtuous person is one whose rational soul wisely governs the desires of the sensitive soul. It also shapes education, understood as the process of developing the rational soul so it can perform its highest function. In politics, this view supports the idea that humans are naturally social beings, because only in community can reason develop and justice be practiced. Aristotle's analysis of the three functions of the soul offers a powerful framework for understanding life at every level. It shows that existence isn't a chaotic mass, but a structured and purposeful process. Each being expresses in its own way a form of life, and the human being with a rational soul is called to live consciously, ethically, and fully. To know the soul, then, is more than studying a philosophical concept. It's understanding what it truly means to live well, from the roots of existence to its highest expression. For Aristotle, understanding nature also means understanding how life continues. In his biological works, especially History of Animals, on the generation of animals and parts of animals, he pays close attention to the phenomenon of reproduction, seeking to explain why living beings reproduce, how they do it, and what roles the male and female play in this process. When discussing these questions, Aristotle combines empirical observation, philosophical explanation, and a teleological perspective, that is, one focused on purpose and final causes. He doesn't see reproduction as a random biological event, but as a necessary process that allows living beings to fully realize their nature and ensure the continuity of their form. For him, life doesn't exist only in the individual, but in the species, which survives through generation. According to Aristotle, all living things aim to preserve their form. Since individuals are finite and perishable, nature invented reproduction as a way to preserve what is essential, the specific form of each being. Nature's work in living things is to preserve what is similar, since it cannot preserve the individual. In other words, reproduction is nature's way of overcoming death. Even though the individual dies, the species endures, because it passes its essence on to the next generation. Once again, this reflects Aristotle's strong teleological view. Nothing in nature exists in vain. Everything has a purpose. Thus, Aristotle sees reproduction as one of the fundamental functions of the vegetative soul, present in both plants and animals. But in animals, and especially in humans, it becomes far more complex, requiring a differentiation of roles and cooperation between the sexes. In the reproductive process, Aristotle assigns distinct roles to the male and female based on his concepts of form and matter. The male provides the active principle, the form, while the female provides the passive principle, the matter. The male gives the form and the principle of movement. The female provides the body, the matter. In modern terms, we might say Aristotle believed that the male's semen carried the essence of the species, the factor that determines the structure and function of the new being, while the female's womb was the place where that essence took shape and became embodied. This distinction reflects Aristotle's broader metaphysical framework, where every being is composed of matter and form. Form is the organizing principle. Matter is what is shaped. In reproduction, the male represents the formative principle, and the female represents the receptive, generative principle that provides the body. Of course, Aristotle's biology, while groundbreaking in many ways, also has limitations that reflect the knowledge and cultural biases of his time. For example, he believed women were biologically colder than men, making them less active in generating life. He thought the female's semen, what we now know as the ovum, was inferior to the male's in its power to create form. Some of his empirical observations about embryology and heredity were inaccurate or incomplete. These ideas remained influential for centuries, but today we know that both the ovum and sperm contribute equally to genetic material. Still, what matters here is understanding how Aristotle built a philosophical explanation for the phenomenon of generation using the conceptual tools available in his era. Aristotle also noticed that reproduction varies among animals. He distinguished between viviparous animals, those that give birth to live young, like mammals, oviparous animals, those that lay eggs, like birds and reptiles, and ovoviviparous animals, intermediate cases, such as certain fish and reptile. He studied the development of embryos in eggs, described stages of growth, and recognized the importance of temperature and nutrition for successful gestation. In many respects, his empirical observations were ahead of his time. In the case of human beings, Aristotle saw reproduction not just as a biological function, but as part of the fulfillment of family and social life. The birth of children fits into a framework of ethical and political relationships. Procreation is a natural good, but it must be guided by virtue, prudence, and the pursuit of a good life in community. Aristotle's greatest achievement on this subject lies in his effort to connect biology with his philosophy of nature. For him, reproduction isn't an isolated event, but part of a larger system in which every being seeks to actualize its essence and contribute to the continuity of the natural world. The distinction between male and female, then, isn't merely anatomical. It reflects the inner logic of nature, which operates through complementary polarities: form and matter, act and potential, active and passive, all directed toward a purpose. Reproduction, according to Aristotle, is nature's way of overcoming time and achieving its highest goal: to preserve being in the species when it cannot preserve it in the individual. The union of male and female mirrors the very structure of reality, where form joins with matter to bring something new into existence, not by chance, but with purpose. Even with the limits of his science, Aristotle invites us to see life not as a product of biological accident, but as an ordered and purposeful expression of nature. To reproduce, for him, is to continue being, to ensure that the essence of life endures. And in that, there is a philosophical greatness that goes beyond biology and touches the very idea of eternity. The relationship between body and soul is one of the oldest and most persistent questions in philosophy. Since the time of Pythagoras and Plato, many thinkers have understood the body and soul as separate entities, often in conflict, as if the soul were a prisoner and the body its cage. Aristotle, however, offers a deeply original and transformative answer. The soul and the body are not two distinct substances, but two aspects of one single being. Against Platonic dualism, Aristotle proposes a hylomorphic view of the human being, that is, a unity of matter, hyl, and form, morph. The body is matter, the soul is form. This essential unity between body and soul allows us to understand the human being as an indivisible whole, in which the soul doesn't merely inhabit the body, but is the very principle that makes the body alive and rational. Plato's dualism. To understand Aristotle's critique, we first need to recall Plato's view. In the Phaedo, Plato argues that the soul is immortal, divine, and incorporeal, while the body is mortal, material, and subject to passions. For Plato, the philosophical life is a preparation for the liberation of the soul, the true essence of the human being, so that it may return to the world of ideas, where eternal truth resides. As long as we possess a body, and the soul is contaminated by such an evil, we shall never attain what we desire most: truth. This dualism between soul and body creates both an ontological and moral hierarchy. The body is seen as a source of error and illusion, while the soul is the seat of reason and truth. Therefore, the philosopher must distance himself from bodily desires and purify the soul. Aristotle rejects this model. He believes Plato separates too sharply what, in reality, is united. In his treatise De Anima, on the soul, Aristotle defines the soul as the form of a natural body having life potentially within it. With this definition, Aristotle invites us to see the soul not as a separate substance, but as the vital and organizing principle of the body. It is the form that gives structure and life to matter, allowing an organism to exist as a living being. Without the body, there is no soul. Without the soul, the body is mere inert matter. This view is known as hylomorphism, the idea that every compound being is made up of matter and form. In the case of humans, the body is the matter, and the soul is the specific form that makes it a rational animal. Aristotle's critique of dualism. Aristotle gives several reasons why Plato's separation of body and soul is flawed. The soul operates through the body. Activities such as sensing, desiring, moving, perceiving, and even thinking all require a body. It's therefore unreasonable to treat the soul as completely independent of it. The unity of the human being demands a unified explanation. If soul and body were two distinct substances, it would be hard to explain how two completely different entities could interact. Aristotle finds it far more coherent to say that there is only one being, the living being, composed of body and soul as one unified substance. Plato's view breaks the continuity of nature. Aristotle notes that all living beings, plants, animals, and humans, have souls, each with different degrees of complexity. Treating the soul as something immaterial and eternal disrupts the natural continuity of life. For Aristotle, the body is not an obstacle to the soul, but its medium of expression and action. The soul's abilities only manifest in and through the body. Sight requires eyes, thought depends on the brain, and desire connects to bodily sensations. Even the rational soul, unique to human beings, acts through the body. Language requires a voice, writing requires hands, moral action requires physical movement. Human activity, praxis, is embodied. To deny the body is to deny the very possibility of a full rational life. The question of the intellect. There is, however, a subtle point in Aristotle's theory. The famous passage about the nous poietikos, the active intellect. In De Anima, Aristotle describes it as separate, impassible, incorporeal, and eternal. At first glance, this seems to contradict his general idea of the soul as the form of the body. For this reason, philosophers have long debated what Aristotle meant. Some argue that he acknowledged a part of the soul that transcends the body, while others interpret this passage in a metaphysical or cosmological sense, rather than as referring to individual immortality. In any case, Aristotle never defends a complete separation between body and soul. Even if the active intellect is eternal, most activities of the soul can only be understood in union with the living body. Broader implications. Aristotle's theory has profound implications for ethics, politics, psychology, and anthropology. In ethics, human goodness depends on the balance between reason, desire, and body. Virtue is not purely spiritual, it requires habits, emotional regulation, and concrete action. In politics, humans are social and embodied beings who live in community by nature, not souls trapped in exile. In education, the formation of character demands both physical and intellectual training, since body and soul develop together. Aristotle offers an integrated view of the human being, a composite of body and soul, matter and form, potentiality and actuality. Against Platonic dualism, he insists that the soul is not a guest in the body, but its living form. Thinking, feeling, desiring, and acting all happen in and through the body. This understanding allows us to see both the dignity of the body and the depth of the soul not as opposites, but as complements. It is in the harmony between the two that the human being finds truth and the possibility of living well with virtue, awareness, and purpose. The question that drives Aristotle's ethics is simple but profound. What is the ultimate goal of human life? What are we really seeking, consciously or not, in all our actions, choices, and ambitions? For Aristotle, the answer is clear. Every human being seeks happiness. But this happiness, which he calls eudaimonia, is not a fleeting pleasure or a temporary emotion. It is something deeper, more stable, and more meaningful, the complete fulfillment of human nature. Eudaimonia, therefore, is the supreme good, the end in itself, the one thing we desire for its own sake, and not as a means to something else. Everything we do, work, study, love, create, struggle, makes sense because deep down we want to live well. Aristotle's ethics is, above all, a philosophy of a fulfilled life, of human flourishing, of what it means to truly live well. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle begins by stating that every human action aims at some good, but among all possible goods, health, wealth, pleasure, fame, he wants to find the highest good, the one that is desired for itself and never as a means to another. The highest good, then, is that which is always desired for its own sake and never as a means: happiness. Happiness in this sense is not an emotional state. It is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, lived over the course of a complete life. It is the continuous exercise of our noblest capacities, lived rationally, ethically, and meaningfully. Misconceptions about happiness. Aristotle examines common ideas about what it means to live well and shows that most of them are mistaken or incomplete. He mentions 3 popular views. The life of pleasure. Many think happiness means feeling pleasure, but that, he says, belongs to animals. It doesn't express what is highest in human nature. The life of honor and fame. Others associate happiness with social recognition, but that depends on external factors, like other people's opinions, which are beyond our control. The life of wealth. Some believe happiness lies in being rich, but wealth is only a means to something else. It is not an end in itself. Therefore, eudaimonia is not external, not random, and not based on the senses. It is rooted in rational activity, the realization of human excellence, or in other words, virtue. Happiness as rational activity. For Aristotle, the human being is a rational animal. This means our unique function, ergon, is to act according to reason. A good life, then, is one in which reason governs the soul and our actions in harmony with virtue. Happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue over a complete life. Virtue, however, is not something we're born with. It is cultivated. It involves deliberate choices, moral habits, constant practice, and education of character. Happiness is not a gift from the gods or a matter of luck. It is something built through a lifetime of balance, wisdom, and effort. Aristotle insists that no one can be called truly happy based on a single moment or a short period of time. Eudaimonia requires consistency and can only be judged fully at the end of one's life, when the whole of a person's existence can be seen, external goods, and the good life. Although happiness depends primarily on virtue, Aristotle acknowledges that it also requires some external goods. Health, friends, sufficient resources, and free time all help create the conditions needed to live virtuously and stably. Still, these things are means, not the ultimate end. At the end of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle suggests that the highest form of eudaimonia is found in the contemplative life, theoria. This is the life devoted to the pursuit of truth, to the contemplation of first causes, and to the full realization of reason. The contemplative life is the most continuous, the most pleasant, the most self-sufficient, and the most worthy of choice. This doesn't mean only philosophers can be happy. Aristotle acknowledges that the ethical life, lived through justice, courage, friendship, and prudence, is also a genuine form of happiness, but he sees contemplation as the highest peak of existence, where the human being comes closest to what is divine within themselves. Happiness and community. Eudaimonia is not a solitary experience. Human beings are, by nature, political animals, zoon politikon, and fulfillment happens within community. Ethical life requires just relationships, true friendships, participation in civic life, respect for laws, and commitment to the common good. For Aristotle, the role of politics is to create the conditions for citizens to live well. A good city is one that educates for virtue, promotes justice, and encourages the rational and ethical life of its people. The art of living well. In Aristotle's Ethics, happiness is not an external reward. It is the very realization of what it means to be human. It is built through the practice of virtue, the deliberate choice of the good, the harmony between reason and desire, the cultivation of friendships, participation in society, and above all, a life lived with purpose and fullness. For Aristotle, to be happy is to flourish as a human being, to fulfill our natural potential with excellence. And that requires not only wanting the good, but becoming good through effort, reason, prudence, and consistency. Because living well is not an accident. It's an art. It's a choice. It's the ultimate goal of every truly free human life. In Aristotle's Ethics, the pursuit of eudaimonia, happiness as the ultimate goal of human life, necessarily passes through the realization of virtue. But what does it actually mean to be virtuous? What distinguishes a merely good action from an excellent one? For Aristotle, virtue isn't about occasional good behavior or natural talent. Virtue is a habit, grounded in reason and guided by the right measure. Through it, the human being becomes what they truly are at their highest potential. Ethical virtue, in Aristotle's view, is a stable disposition of the soul to act well according to right reason. It's acquired and built over time through deliberate practice, education, and conscious choice. Virtue, therefore, is not accidental. It's a rational habit. Aristotle notes that human goodness doesn't exist only in abstract thought, but in concrete actions. Ethics, then, is not a theoretical science like mathematics. It's a practical science. Its goal is not simply to know what virtue is, but to become virtuous. We study ethics not to know what virtue is, but to become good. This requires forming one's character through consistent habits, developing an inner readiness to choose and act in accordance with reason. It's here that virtue reveals itself as a mean between excess and deficiency, determined by prudence, phronesis, that is, by practical wisdom that judges well in the situations of life. Aristotle defines ethical virtue as a hexis, an acquired disposition, a state of character that inclines us to act rightly. This distinguishes it from passions, which we feel passively, and from natural faculties, which we possess without choice. For example, no one chooses to feel fear, hunger, or anger, nor do we choose to have the ability to learn. But we can choose how we react to fear, how we control anger, how we use what we've learned, and that's where virtue comes in. It belongs to the realm of deliberate, consistent action. Ethical virtue is a deliberate habit, consisting of a mean relative to us, determined by reason, as a prudent person would determine it. A virtuous action, for Aristotle, isn't simply good by accident or habit. It must align with right reason, orthos logos. This means virtue isn't instinctive or automatic. It requires discernment, reflection, and balance. Reason is what identifies the proper mean, avoids extremes, and adjusts action to the specific circumstances. For instance, courage is the mean between cowardice, deficiency, and recklessness, excess. But the exact measure depends on the situation, the person, and the context. There's no universal formula for virtue, only a guideline. Act as a prudent person would act, someone with practical wisdom and experience. This is a key point in Aristotle's moral philosophy. Morality isn't about rigid rules, but about forming a character capable of judging and choosing well in each situation. For Aristotle, virtue is synonymous with excellence, arete. Just as the excellence of an eye is to see well, or the excellence of a knife is to cut well, the excellence of a human being is to act according to reason. Virtue is, therefore, the full realization of the rational soul performing its proper function. Aristotle divides excellence into two main groups: ethical virtues, related to emotions and actions, courage, temperance, generosity, justice; intellectual virtues, related to the mind and intellect, wisdom, knowledge, prudence. Ethical virtue, in particular, balances our desires, emotions, and actions with reason. It shapes character, gives form to behavior, and directs our choices toward the good. Another essential point in Aristotle's theory is that virtue is not innate. It's formed through the repetition of good actions. No one is born just or brave. We become so by acting justly and bravely over and over again. Action shapes character, and character, in turn, shapes action. It's a virtuous cycle. Men become just by doing just acts, and brave by doing brave acts. Still, habit alone is not enough. It must be guided by reflection and the right intention. For an action to be truly virtuous, Aristotle sets three conditions. It must be done with knowledge. It must be chosen for its own sake, not out of fear or convenience. It must come from a firm and stable character. The formation of virtue, then, requires education, example, and consistent practice. From early on, individuals must be trained to choose what is good, to control impulses, and to think before acting. This is why, for Aristotle, ethics is closely tied to politics. A just city is one that educates its citizens in virtue, shaping laws, institutions, and customs that foster good character. Virtue, therefore, isn't an abstract ideal. It's something deeply practical and lived, rooted in daily choices, emotions, and relationships. Aristotle teaches that happiness doesn't come from luck or external goods, but from the quality of our character. To be happy is to be virtuous. To be virtuous is to act deliberately, with balance and reason. Virtue is a construction, a rational habit guided by right reason, adjusted to our nature and to real life. It is the path to eudaimonia, because through it we fully realize what we are, rational, moral, and social beings, capable of choosing the good and living excellently. In Aristotle's ethics, virtue is neither an extreme nor a rejection of human passions. On the contrary, it is the right balance between two excesses, the point of equilibrium adjusted by reason. This principle, known as the doctrine of the mean, mesotes, is one of the most original and enduring ideas in moral philosophy. It teaches us that ethical excellence doesn't mean eliminating our desires or emotions, but moderating them according to the right measure so that they serve a rational and fulfilling life. More than a mathematical formula, the mean is a practical guideline that considers the person, the situation, and the context. That's why Aristotle insists, it isn't an arithmetic middle point, but a mean relative to us, determined by right reason, the way a prudent person, phronimos, would act. For Aristotle, every virtue lies between two vices, one of excess and one of deficiency. Courage, for example, lies between recklessness, too much confidence, and cowardice, too little. Generosity lies between wastefulness, spending too much, and stinginess, spending too little. Virtue is a disposition involving choice, consisting in a mean relative to us, determined by reason, as a prudent person would determine it. This doctrine is rooted in Aristotle's view of nature as ordered and purposeful, teleological. Just as the body finds health in balance, neither too much heat nor too much cold, the soul finds its moral health in the right measure, the one that preserves our integrity and rational purpose as human beings. A common misunderstanding is to think that the doctrine of the mean promotes mediocrity or passivity. Nothing could be further from Aristotle's ethics. Virtue doesn't lie in the middle out of weakness, but out of strength. It requires judgment, deliberate choice, emotional control, and constant practice. The mean is a point of excellence, not neutrality. For example, the virtue of truthfulness stands between boastfulness, exaggeration, and false modesty, concealment. Speaking the truth in the right way, at the right time, with the right tone, that takes wisdom, not indifference. In other words, the mean is not a compromise but an achievement. It's the hardest path because it avoids extremes that can be tempting, the excess that looks like courage, or the deficiency that hides behind prudence. To be virtuous is to resist those distortions and stay true to reason. Aristotle gives several examples that illustrate this principle. Courage, between recklessness and cowardice. Temperance, between indulgence and insensitivity. Generosity, between extravagance and greed. Justice, between giving too much and too little gentleness. Between excessive anger and apathy. Truthfulness, between exaggeration and deceit. Friendliness, between flattery and rudeness. Notice that every virtue involves ordinary human feelings or actions: fear, pleasure, money, anger, or social interaction. Aristotle's ethics doesn't reject these aspects of life. Rather, it educates and orders them under the light of reason and the common good. Finding the mean is not simple. There's no universal rule that tells us exactly what's too much or too little in every situation. That's why Aristotle highlights the central role of prudence, phronesis, the practical intellectual virtue that discerns what's right to do in each concrete situation. Ethical virtue is impossible without prudence. Phronesis is the eye of the moral soul. It judges with sensitivity, experience, and attention to reality. Without it, the doctrine of the mean becomes abstract and useless. With it, virtue becomes alive, embodied in real life, filled with difficult choices, strong emotions, and real dilemmas. The formation of virtuous character requires education, example, and habit. Moderation isn't innate. It's learned, practiced, and slowly integrated until it becomes a way of being. Like a musician who trains their ear, or an athlete who develops coordination, the virtuous person shapes their soul through the repeated practice of right measure. That's why Aristotle emphasizes the importance of the social and political environment. A just city is one that educates its citizens in virtue, creating laws, institutions, and customs that promote balance, reason, and the common good. Ethics, in this sense, is inseparable from politics. The doctrine of the mean shows that the good life is an art of balance. It isn't guided by rigid rules, but by rational principles applied with sensitivity. Excess can be just as destructive as deficiency. In both cases, we lose the harmony that fulfills us as rational and moral beings. Virtue lies in acting with balance, awareness, and right intention. Not out of fear or convenience, but because we recognize that human excellence is found in self-mastery, in the harmony between reason, emotion, and action. Aristotle teaches that virtue is the right mean, not because it's average, but because it's right. It demands practical wisdom, self-control, and deep attention to human reality. To be virtuous is to choose the mean, not as an escape from extremes, but as the realization of the best within us. Ethics, therefore, isn't a theory distant from life, but a constant exercise in balance, a search for the right measure, day by day, choice by choice. It's along this path that the soul is shaped, character is strengthened, and happiness becomes possible, not by luck, but by rational and human achievement. In Aristotle's Ethics, virtue isn't just an abstract ideal, it's a concrete practice. And to act virtuously in the real world, with all its uncertainty, conflict, and complexity, takes more than good intentions or theory. It requires prudence, or as Aristotle called it in Greek, phronesis. This isn't just a practical skill, it's the intellectual virtue of moral action, the quality that guides sound decisions in complex, changing situations. Unlike modern common sense, which often reduces prudence to caution or hesitation, Aristotle saw phronesis as an active and essential force, the practical intelligence that judges well and chooses the best course of action according to reason and the good. Without it, ethical virtue becomes blind and morality unworkable. Aristotle distinguished two kinds of reason: theoretical reason, concerned with what is eternal, universal, and necessary, as in science and philosophy; practical reason, concerned with human action, what is contingent, particular, and changeable. Phronesis belongs to practical reason. It's the ability to deliberate well about what is good or bad for a human being. But to deliberate well isn't just to calculate the means to an end. It's to know which ends are worth pursuing and how to act in harmony with them in each concrete situation. Prudence is a rational disposition concerned with action, about what is good and bad for man. For Aristotle, there can be no true virtue without prudence. Acting with courage, justice, or generosity requires more than good intentions. It demands knowing what to do, when, how, and with whom. Every moral situation is unique, full of nuance, and demands sensitive judgment. That's why prudence is the guiding principle of all ethical virtues. It's impossible to be truly good without prudence, or prudent without moral virtue. Prudence, then, isn't a separate virtue, but the one that gives form and direction to all the others. It's the bridge between knowledge and action between theory and life. The prudent person is someone who not only desires the good, but knows how to put it into practice. Aristotle also distinguishes true prudence from cleverness, Dea notes. Cleverness is the ability to reach a goal skillfully, but that goal might be selfish, unjust, or immoral. A con artist may be clever, but never prudent. Phronesis, by contrast, assumes a morally upright disposition. It isn't just about using the right means. It's about choosing worthy ends. It seeks the good of the human being as a whole, not a momentary benefit, but the full flourishing of life. In Aristotelian ethics, morality can't be reduced to fixed rules or instruction manuals. Reality is diverse, contexts change, and dilemmas demand discernment. That's why Aristotle says that the ultimate standard of moral action is the prudent person, ho phronimos, the one who has experience, sensitivity, and balanced judgment. The right decision is the one that the prudent person would make. This model isn't arbitrary. It's a concrete reference, wisdom embodied. The prudent person is someone who lives virtue with clarity, who acts rightly not by chance, but through thoughtful conviction. They are the measure of what is just, fitting, and timely, not because they know everything, but because they know how to discern well at the right time. Prudence involves a process of deliberation, boulousis, that is, reflecting on the best means to achieve the good life. This requires freedom, responsibility, and awareness of circumstances. Deliberation guided by prudence depends on memory, learning from past experiences, understanding, grasping what's truly at stake, quick insight, perceiving relevant details quickly, time, avoiding impulsive actions, determination, acting at the right moment. Prudence, then, isn't just about thinking. It's about thinking in order to act. It's the full exercise of responsible freedom, human action, guided by the good and adjusted to reality. Developing prudence ultimately means training one's perception, learning to see what truly matters, to distinguish the essential from the secondary, to foresee the consequences of choices. This can't be learned from books alone. It's learned in life itself, through experience, example, dialogue, and reflection on moral action. Ethics, in this sense, isn't a set of ready-made answers, but a formation of character, an art of judging and acting well. Prudence is the heart of this art, the virtue of the wise person who acts with justice, courage, temperance, and humanity. Aristotle shows us that phronesis is much more than caution. It's the practical intelligence of the good life, the internal compass that guides our choices toward eudaimonia. It connects reason and action, theory and practice, intention and reality. Without it, virtue becomes blind and morality ineffective. To be prudent is to know how to live, to act with wisdom, balance, and attention to what is truly good. Above all, it is to recognize that the ethical life isn't built on formulas, but on discernment, and that the good isn't something we simply know, but something we build step by step with clear judgment and strength of character. For Aristotle, the excellence of human life depends on the fulfillment of the rational soul, and this fulfillment is expressed through virtue, or arete in Greek. However, Aristotle clearly distinguishes two fundamental types of virtues, ethical and intellectual, dianoetic. This distinction, presented mainly in the Nicomachean Ethics, isn't just for teaching purposes. It reflects the deep structure of the human soul and the diversity of its activities. Ethical virtues deal with character and action, shaping our desires, emotions, and choices. Intellectual virtues, on the other hand, are connected to the activity of thought, to reason in its highest use, whether practical or theoretical. Both are essential, but they play different roles in moral and intellectual life. Together, they form the image of a truly virtuous person, someone who not only acts well, but also thinks well. Ethical or moral virtues relate to the part of the soul that participates in reason, but is also influenced by desires, impulses, and emotions. We don't choose to feel fear, hunger, or anger, but we can choose how to respond to them. That's where ethical virtue appears, in the rational control of desire and action. Examples of ethical virtues include courage, the mean between recklessness and cowardice; temperance, the mean between indulgence and insensitivity; generosity, the mean between extravagance and greed; justice, the steady disposition to give each person what is due. These virtues are not innate. We are not born with them. They are formed through the repetition of just, moderate, and balanced actions until they become a stable part of our character. That's why Aristotle says that ethical virtue is a deliberate habit guided by right reason, orthos logos. Moral virtues are acquired through habit. They do not arise in us by nature. Practice, education, and experience are essential for ethical virtues to take root in character. Their ultimate goal is to make a person capable of acting well, consistently, and wisely in the changing circumstances of life. If ethical virtues regulate our actions and emotions, intellectual virtues perfect our reason, our capacity for knowledge and judgment. They belong to the part of the soul that is entirely rational, and their aim is the pursuit of truth, whether in the practical or theoretical realm. Aristotle identifies 5 main intellectual virtues: art, techne, the ability to produce things with a specific purpose, like the art of a carpenter, doctor, or architect; prudence, phronesis, practical wisdom that guides moral action, as discussed in the previous lesson; science, episteme, demonstrative and certain knowledge of universal principles; wisdom, sophia, the union of scientific knowledge and intuitive insight directed toward understanding the highest causes; intelligence, nous, the immediate grasp of first principles, the intuitive understanding of reality. Wisdom is the most perfect form of knowledge, for it deals with the highest things and the strongest reasons. Intellectual virtues, therefore, don't directly aim at action, except for phronesis, prudence, which serves as a bridge between knowing and doing. The others are oriented toward contemplating truth, especially in its purest and most eternal form, the unchanging principles of being and nature. To live well, it's not enough to think correctly. We must also act rightly. Likewise, it's not enough to control desires if we can't judge what is truly good. That's why Aristotle insists on the necessary collaboration between ethical and intellectual virtues. Ethics alone can be misguided without the direction of reason, and reason, no matter how brilliant, can be ineffective or even harmful without a virtuous character. The complete human being is the one whose intelligence serves the good life, and whose actions are guided by enlightened reason. Just as the eye of the soul cannot see without virtue, a person cannot truly be good without prudence, nor prudent without moral virtue. The distinction between ethical and intellectual virtues has practical consequences for human development. Education must include both the formation of character and the cultivation of thought. Children must be taught to act well, to feel in an orderly way, and to respect others, but they must also learn to think, to judge, and to reflect deeply. The good life, eudaimonia, depends on this twofold path: acting well and thinking well. Ethical virtues shape the moral heart. Intellectual virtues refine the mind. Both are necessary, and they complete one another. This distinction reveals the richness and depth of Aristotle's view of the human soul. We are not just reason, nor mere impulse. We are complex beings who desire, think, choose, and act. For that reason, we need virtues that shape our character and virtues that sharpen our reason. To be virtuous, for Aristotle, is to live according to the excellence of the whole soul. It is to act with justice, courage, and temperance, but also to think with clarity, prudence, and wisdom. In that harmony, we find the path to eudaimonia, a life that is full, rational, and worthy of our human nature. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through Aristotle's thought. If you've made it to the end, it means that, like us, you believe in the importance of knowledge, philosophy, and the pursuit of a more conscious, ethical, and meaningful life. If this content helped you reflect, learn, or see the world in a new way, don't forget to like the video. It tells YouTube that this kind of content is worth sharing with more people. Share it with someone who's interested in philosophy, education, or simply in understanding life a little better. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next episodes. There's a lot more coming. New series, deep topics, timeless debates and reflections that have crossed the centuries. Now tell me, which of Aristotle's ideas stood out the most to you? Or is there one you disagree with? Leave your comment below. We read them all and reply with care and attention. Stay with us here on the channel, explore the other videos, and keep reflecting, because philosophy doesn't end with an answer. It begins with your next thought. See you in the next video.